Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we are live.
Okay, committee, let's get started. We've got a day ahead of us this morning. I want to tip my hat to the chairman. I thought yesterday went really well and
Thank you.
pretty educational. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee, for good work, great input. And today I look forward to hopefully setting an even better foundation for the work we're going to do in the interim. Appreciate all of you from the department being here today to walk us through and hopefully catch us up to speed. So, Mr. Chairman, anything this morning
No.
before we get started?
Did it. We got it
Okay.
Yesterday.
All right, Director Reiner,
Oh,
welcome.
oh.
Good morning.
I don't think we did take it.
Senator,
Roll call.
do we do a second day roll call? We never do that, do we? Wow, I forgot. Let's do roll call. Thank you.
Senator Anderson.
Here.
Senator Furphy. Senator McEwen. Senator Pappas.
Excused,
Representative Baker. Representative Brown.
excused,
Representative Burt.
Here.
Representative Henderson. Representative McGuire. Representative Obermuller. Representative O'Hearn.
Here.
Representative Stibar.
Present.
Co-Chairman Burkhart.
Here.
Co-Chairman Landon.
here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a
Thank you for
quorum.
that reminder, Senator. And by the way, appreciate Representative McGuire for creating the opportunity to get out to the airport last night and to get a good look around and have some camaraderie. We really appreciated that. It was a beautiful night and really enjoyed the committee. And so thank you for that, Representative. Director Reiner, now we're ready to go. And,
Mr.
troops-
Chairman,
Yeah,
members
thank
of the committee, thank you. We'll look forward to today. So for the record, Luke Reiner, Director of YDOT. And Mr. Chairman, I would certainly concur. Yesterday afternoon, I thought there's some excellent dialogue and some good background set. Based on that, before we jump into the budget presentation, which is scheduled, there is, I would like to just answer a couple questions that came up yesterday, just for the record, to get them off the list. So first, we did hand out a STIP to all of you, or state transportation improvement plan. Now, my apologies, we did not bring enough. So we brought 9 in the box. So if I owe you one, we'll get it to you. If you don't want the hard copy, and somebody else does, we'll fix it. But I'll get, Heather, you know who got one, and we'll just get additional hard copies to Heather for distribution. But that is the state transportation improvement plan. And that's really our Bible in terms of what's coming up in the next 5 or 6 years.
So Director Reiner, real quickly, Heather, do you have a list then of those of us who received this spiral bound this morning?
Yes.
So there is a yes. So committee members, if you did not get one of these, it will be forthcoming. I'd love for each of you to have it. It's a good reference document, and I think it's important to have it. Director Reiner, thank you for that.
Mr. Chairman. Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator
I got
Anderson.
one in the mail, so I gave mine to Senator McEwen. Just so they know.
Okay, thank
I
you.
believe that I've got one too, so I'll double check that and can pass one along too. So
All right, thank you. So just be advised, it's a living document that we update quarterly, but it's generically correct. And so we'll probably push out a new one each year. Our goal is to try and keep you as informed as we can on those.
So Director Reiner, before we get started, I did want to mention, and this is for the benefit of the committee, sometimes we try to ask some questions of you and your staff, your agency, to give us some examples of things, to bounce things around with us. We understand that you walk a pretty careful line there. I think everybody on the committee understands that. So thank you for being willing to to do some of that. And we understand that you're not trying to dictate anything. It's up to the committee to do what we're going to do. But we may do that today. We may ask all of you a question or two that if you feel like it leads in a direction, that's okay. We'll leave it up to the committee after that. So,
All right, thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman. Yeah, thank you. So, just as a couple follow-ups to some questions yesterday, the question was asked about exact costs on dry piney, and Co-Chairman Burkhardt, I believe that was your question. So I just wanted to make sure we gave you the exact numbers on that one. And so for the record, the build grant was 14.5 mil. Game and Fish contributed 1.3 mil. The Wildlife Foundation contributed 1.1 million. YDOT kicked in 2.9, and from some other federal sources, it was 2.1. So there's the summary on dry piney. I-80, the reroute on I-80, I gave you a wrong number, not on purpose. So the entire length of that route is 100 miles. It is between 19 miles is the number I used yesterday. It's between 19 and 20 miles longer than the existing I-80. And that's why the increased cost. So it's about 100 miles of 4-lane to build, thus the cost. So if you did that, instead of being 402 miles across the state, it would be about 422. So there's that one. And the question is asked about the fence. And so we do not automatically replace fences. It is based on the useful life of the fence, which depending on the nature of the fence is between 20 and 40 years. So it's part of the contract that goes into place in terms of those fences. And so that's the response to the fence question.
okay. And so Representative Stibar, I think that might have been your question, if I remember. So if you have anything further on that, I would encourage you to get with the department and take that up further. Before we get away from that issue, Director Reiner, if you would allow me a sort of a pet peeve. It's kind of been my deal for a while. Those rolls of rusty old fence wire just end up laying there. And I noticed that we finally got a couple of them picked up between here and Shoshone, but we still have some. And, I've checked in on that in the past, but it is kind of an eyesore. And I think what happens, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, doesn't the department offer that to the landowners, and they probably say that they want it, and so it stays there? Or can you correct me if I'm wrong?
Mr. Chairman, to the best of my knowledge, you're correct, because I did ask that same question, and I believe the answer was right along that line. And so maybe what we need to do is say, hey, I'll need to check with my engineers, but it could be we put a statute on, hey, it can't sit out in the right of way. So let me follow up on that. But I believe you're exactly correct about we don't own it. If we owned it, it'd be gone.
If there's, I realize this is a minor in a whole bunch of majors, but it is, it's a route that is highly used. The one that I'm referring to, and there might be some other spots where we just have some of that fence laying around. And if we could even contact the landowner and say, do you still want that? And if not, if we happen to have a crew out there, we could maybe pick it up and get rid of it. But
Mr. Chairman,
thank
absolutely.
you for that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Please.
And I would, officer, to Representative Stibar, if there's a specific road or example, I'd be happy to follow up on that addition.
Thank you for that,
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, in the past, we replaced fence because of the antelope pass through. We had to raise the fence up a little bit. And I know we replaced quite a bit of fence in the 70s and 80s because the antelope had to be able to go under the fence. I don't know if we're doing that anymore, but that was certainly a lot of it done in the past.
Yeah, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, certainly if there was, we were putting in a wildlife friendly fence, the old fence would come down. Okay, yeah. Then
Okay.
the last.
Please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Then the,
Oh, excuse me, Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask, in my community, we had a company that would replace the snow fence because they wanted the aged snow fence at no cost to YDOT. Is that still occurring?
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Furphy, yes. In fact, it's ongoing as we speak. And we actually use that as an example of really some innovative partnership and making best use of a state asset. So the other talking point there would be is we allow that wood to be harvested for its natural beauty every 7 years, and they pay us to do that. And so we probably wouldn't have to replace that wood for probably 20, 25 years. And so we're cycling through it quicker. And then what we do is we take that revenue and we're putting it back into our accounts to build new and additional snow fence. So it's really, again, I think a wise use of state assets while keeping, we've worked through some growing pains on that program by trying to ensure the ability for everybody to compete in that process under our sort of fair bidding rules in the state. But I think we're at a very good spot as we speak right now. But thank you. But Mr. Chairman, one other update to you. You asked me about the very pretty colors on the map. And so my report to you is, and I should have just left the legend on there, but I was trying to, not make it so complicated. The green are our interstate jobs. The red are 2-lane where you'll have a 20-minute delay. The orange, 2-lane, and you're going to have an additional delay and travel on gravel. And the pink is other. So that's
pink
the
is
meaning.
what?
Pink is other.
Other.
So with some other type of condition there.
I thought maybe it was avoided at all costs.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's a quick update on some of the due outs from me back to you from yesterday.
Okay, thank you, Director. Appreciate that. Who's up this morning? Dennis, is that you?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Director?
we're up for budget. I'm going to hand it to Mr. Byrne quickly, but I would like to maybe kick it off with our guiding principles. And so I think you should have up in front of you, and on your first slide in the first presentation is a discussion on our guiding principles. And I would just phrase this as, yesterday you saw the DI management report, which really, painted a picture of, wow, there's some requirements out there. And I think part of, living in this world is, recognizing where you sit, what the challenges are, and what the terrain looks like, and then deciding how you're going to operate within that terrain. And that's, there's probably some old military terms coming out there, but that's still sort of how I think about how we're going to operate in this environment. And so we knowing what the challenges were, sat down and said, listen, how are we going to prioritize? How are we going to prioritize the fiscal assets that we have? Because in the end, that's our responsibility is for the Wyoming resident, for you, for the governor, is to ensure the best transportation system we can with the assets that we have. And so we did run these through our Transportation Commission for approval and also through the governor for approval. It's a living document, but it's worked really good for us. And we use it internally and we use it externally, because I think, as the elected leaders of this state, I think you should expect me to be able to tell you why we're spending our money and how. And we will always go back to these guiding principles for that. So I'll just walk you through them quickly and not spend a lot of time on it. But the very first thing I'll tell you is our employees are our most important asset. And I spend a lot of time thinking about the men and women that work for our state, and specifically the men and women that work for WYDOT. I can't give them everything that I'd like. But every decision we make, we think about how it affects the men and women that work for us. Then you really get down to then the first budget issue that's on there, and it's the concept of aligning revenue with expenses. So what do we mean by that? Is what we discovered as we started peeling back the books in YDOT as we were working through this, was that sometimes a YDOT was paying the match for other governmental entities. For example, a sheriff in County X might want to put on a drinking and driving program. And there's a federal grant that's available for that, which would require a 20% match. So we would funnel the 80% grant through YDOT because it comes through us as highway safety money. And then YDOT would pay the 20% match. And so we said, guys, I don't think we should do that. If the sheriff wants to put on the program, that's great. We'll support it, but the local community should support the grant in sort of the match. So we've implemented that rule and we're rolling. And the whole concept is let's all sort of pay our fair share. Then as you go down to the next one, we talk about addressing critical life safety issues. So we will always tackle the critical life safety issues. There's not a lot of those. In the past year, I can think of basically 3, and we have another one that's ongoing right now. And the 3 that share with you from last year would be, one was a bridge over the Snake River out on Highway 22. And I think you heard about that. And that was really a discussion of cattle trucks and overloading and that type of issue. The second one was a bridge on Highway 130 in Carbon County. And we took care of it actually during the session. Was an immediate response to get that bridge so it didn't cave in. The third one that's been ongoing for a while is a truck arrestor on Teton Pass because that thing failed on us. And we're now waiting final tests to get that back into operation. But we immediately spent money to fix that because you got to have it. And then the one we have ongoing is actually another bridge that's failed over Horse Creek in Laramie County. So that one we're taking the steps to immediately fix it. So just know we'll always fix those critical life safety things. Then our next priority is preserving the assets that we have, because we know that we're critically short of revenue. And so the decision we made is we have to maintain what we have to the best of our capability. And it's more than pavement, and it's more than bridges. It's the list that you see here. And that goes back to the fact that YDOT is 5, sort of entities kludged together into one YDOT, but they all are required funding, and the funding comes basically from one pot. And so we will work to maintain all of those assets that you see there. If you flip the slide, then the next item down is to make sure we stay operationally effective and efficient. And so we've spent a lot of time aligning our fleet. In fact, we've downsized our fleet and reallocated where some of the vehicles sit. We've relooked at some of our buildings, and we're really working to try and we do lease space around the state, and we are really in line with the state's effort to try and get us out of leases, working towards that end. And you can see what else is on there. And then the next item down would be, if we make some decisions, we really do want to try to minimize the negative impact on the traveling public. And so what's an example of that? Hey, we tried to save some money closing down rest areas. And the rest areas that were closed were very targeted in terms of trying to minimally impact the traveling public. Now, I hear you, it was an impact, but you make decisions and move out. I'm glad, and we talked about it yesterday, that those are coming back online. And then the very last priority for us would be growing the system in terms of what we talk about, mobility and capacity, improvements. And while all of those jobs and projects are needed, what we've said right now is we can't afford to maintain what we have. So why would we add to the system? And so that is a decision. So those are the I think about 9 or 10 projects that we indefinitely delayed last year. For example, if you're from Sheridan County, you're familiar with Coffeen South, which is the road coming south out of Sheridan. There isn't a plan to grow that to 5 lanes. It's delayed. There's a 5-lane down in Laramie County around LCCC with the Sweetwater grass development. So delayed. Passing lanes on Highway 20, 26, and 59, delayed. And so they're all important. We'd all like to get to those. And actually, we are seeking some additional funding in terms of grants and other sources. But right now, in terms of our normal funding that we receive, that's at the very bottom of our priority. So, Mr. Chairman, that's the guiding principles. And I think as you look at the budget presentation today, this is the mindset of us as we tackle, the budget issues of WYDOT. This is what we go back to. I'll just stop and see if there's any questions on that.
Director, thank you. Committee representative, go ahead. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Director. I just had a quick question about the match and the 90 portion, 90-10, or is YDOT not matching the aeronautical portion as well? Or is it just for the locals? And is that just a policy?
Director, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Baker, so that's a good question. Legally, by statute, the state is required to match those federal funds that come in for our roads and the airports. So the ones I was talking about not matching would be local and other governmental agencies, sort of just some discretionary type funding that would come in that we are not required to match. So we'll always match what we're required to match. But if it's somebody else requesting money that's a pass through for us that we are not required to match, then it's their responsibility to match it.
Representative Baker, follow up. Okay, thank you. Committee, any other questions before we launch into the line by line?
Okay.
Anything for the director? Mr. Co-Chairman, would you like to give a little thought or two on that front?
Just a quick, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick thought. I know that a number of you have never seen YDOT's complete budget. This is what they present to appropriations. They usually present us an abbreviated one without all the fine detail, and this has a lot of the fine detail in it so that we can understand where the money comes from, what they do with it in between, and where it goes. And that, because they're off general fund money. We did that several years ago. So this is really education for all of us. If you have questions on it, and you can see there's a lot of detail here, I would say ask them, but this is really an educational process for the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that's really helpful, and committee, don't be afraid. We're gonna dig down a little bit. We wanted to make sure that all of us have a really good look as we represent, this area of the world going forward into future sessions. We want to make sure we've got a good foundation of understanding, where the money is. And so thank you for that, Director, and look forward to the presentation upcoming.
You bet, Mr.
Anything
Chairman.
else, committee, before we go? Okay, Director, go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, we did hand out one page that looks like this, YDOT budget highlights. I don't think in the sense of time, I don't think we'll run through there. Mr. Byrne will hit that. Most of these as he goes through his program. If you're scanning through here and see one that you're particularly interested in, listen for it. If we don't hit it, we can talk it at the end. But there's a lot of, we all hear lots of things about YDOT budget. Some of them are true, some of them are not. And so really today, to your point, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman, education, ask us lots of questions, try and be very transparent and help you understand a fairly complex budget.
Okay, perfect. Please proceed, gentlemen. Mr. Byrne, welcome. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning to the committee. To my left is Rodney Fryer. He is our budget manager. And so between the two of us, we should be able to answer most of your questions. If not, we'll make sure to get the answers back to you as we move through this. A couple of things that I just want to talk about before we get started.
Dennis, just for formality, could you tell us who
Sorry.
you are?
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. Dennis Byrne, Chief Financial Officer with YDOT.
Okay, thank you.
You bet, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, what you have in front of you, as the co-chair had already mentioned, is our detailed presentation. Now, there's only 16 slides to the actual presentation. And you'll notice that as we go through the presentation that there are YDOT symbols on each of those 16 slides. Those YDOT symbols are an opportunity to dig in for more detail as it relates to that slide. Those are drill-ins. Our intent here is not to touch on every drill-in, but some of the more important drill-ins as we move through this budget presentation. But please, to both the chairman and the co-chair's point, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Stop us. We'll be happy to walk through those things with you. Now, what you have received in front of you is a hard copy that includes all of the details with all of the drill-ins. If this committee, Mr. Chairman, would like an electronic copy, we can provide that to LSO, and LSO can send that out to you folks. It's a little easier to drill in on the actual slide that you're looking at on an electronic format versus a hard copy format. So we'll be happy to provide that for you folks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Byrne. Let's take a look at this as we go through this morning committee, and maybe we can decide. If anyone wants that electronic copy, we'll sure let you know. But Mr. Byrne, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to go ahead and start on the first slide here. And we'll start right at the very top of the slides. You can see that for fiscal year 2021, our anticipated revenue is approximately $871 million. A couple of things that I want to point out about this, and that I would ask that you kind of keep it in your mind as we move through. This is above and beyond what we would normally receive in any fiscal year. You'll see some detail as we move through here, but our budget is generally somewhere between $550 million and $700 million. The reason that this budget is larger this year in 21, or we're anticipating a larger budget than in previous years, is because of additional federal funds. You heard us talk about it a little bit yesterday with the omnibus dollars, the additional federal dollars. There's also a couple of grants, specific purpose federal grants that we received for 21. One of those is the Dry Piney grant that the director has spoke about a couple of different times now. So this is not a usual budget level for us. We're certainly happy to take the money and put it to good use, but it's not what we would normally see in a normal fiscal period. And it is a large budget, Mr. Chairman. There is no question about that. But as you heard yesterday with the dye management presentation, there's about a $354 million annual unfunded need. So although this is a very large budget, we're still significantly short from on an annual perspective in terms of what the needs are. YDOT is also a little unique among states in terms of the breadth of our mission. That's not to say that other states don't have some of the pieces of our mission that YDOT has, but I think YDOT is the only state that has WildLink, NG911, Highway Patrol, Executive Protection, Aeronautics, DMV. So we are unique in that we have a very broad mission that needs to be supported both operationally and financially. Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to point out before we get into the meat of this slide here is that approximately for fiscal year 2021, approximately 12.5% of our budget is direct pass through to the locals. So it does not benefit YDOT's operation directly. There's pass through for aeronautics, and there are other pass through for transit and the local road program. So these do not benefit YDOT's operation, but they are reflected in the $871 million worth of revenue. Lastly, before I dig in, Mr. Chairman, I think I did touch on this briefly. We're going to talk about some more detail in some follow-on slides here, but we are not anticipating that the federal dollars, the additional federal dollars that we're seeing now will be long-term or sustainable. Will basically be provided, at least what we know today is just our normal formal funding or our formula funding. Now, that does not include any of the American Jobs Plan that may come out. But again, those, I don't anticipate those to be long-term sustainable funding sources.
So it'll be a shot in the arm, but
Mr. Chairman,
like
that
you
is-
said, not sustaining.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that is exactly right. And we'll put it to good use. But it will not make our $354 million problem go away. It helps, and we're appreciative.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Am I safe to assume that that extra money is going to projects that we're calling shovel ready or to major things we absolutely have to get done now?
Mr. Chairman, the answer to that is yes.
Okay, thank you.
They're all based on the guiding principles that the director, it just went over with you folks.
Okay, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on this slide specifically, WYDOT has at the highest level three sources of revenue. You can see that the federal revenue here, which includes aeronautics, FTA, Federal Highway Administration dollars, accounts for about $510 million, or about 58% of our entire budget. The top blue square are our highway user fees. These are our fuel taxes, our vehicle registrations, driver's license. And you'll see that in parentheses there, you see that that's restricted. And what we mean by that is that these are restricted per the Constitution. Article 15, Section 16 of the Constitution outlines how we can spend these dollars. So they cannot be spent on aeronautics, for instance. These are state dollars. It cannot be spent for aeronautics, cannot be spent for federal transit type programs or local transit type programs, cannot be spent on executive protection. So there's a very specific highway construction, maintenance, most law enforcement activity, and then the administration that associated with administering these laws.
Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You suppose aeronautics was left out just because of the time the Constitution was written and we haven't ever gone back and changed that?
Mr. Chairman, to be
Mr. Burke?
speculation, but it seems logical that that would be the conclusion.
Is that
Timing.
something we need to do, Mr. Chairman?
I think, Senator, that's a good thought. It would be a lift. No question that would be a lift. So it's something we can sure think about. But Mr. Byrne, thank you for outlining.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I
my
think that's
pleasure.
helpful to understand that a lot of these funds, you can't use them for certain purposes. So,
And Mr. Chairman, that is a very good point. There are strings attached to these different pots of funding. So
Mr. Byrne, I'm going to interject a question real quickly, not to slow us down, but it's something that I get asked all the time. And it's related to the big signs, the big lighted billboard signs. Lots of constituents wondering why we put them up. And my understanding is it is somewhat related to us not having a primary seatbelt law. Is that correct or not?
Mr. Chairman, that is something I'm going to have to get back to you on.
Okay.
I do believe that those signs have a connection to federal requirements on traffic control. Don't know if it's related to the fact that we don't have a primary seatbelt law. So we will get back to you on that.
I do know that most of the construction of those big billboard signs, it is federally funded, is it not?
Mr. Chairman, we're talking about the directional signs
Yeah.
over the interstate.
Yeah. The amber alert signs, all of the
Yes.
up over the top.
Yeah. So there are some federal eligibilities in those signs, and so some of them are federally funded. Of course, there's a state match to that as well.
Okay. Anything you guys can get me on that particular thing for the next meeting or whatever, that would be helpful.
Be happy to, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Mr. Byrne. Please continue.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh,
Representative
excuse
Overmuller
me,
here.
Representative Overmuller. Sorry, I
Thank you,
couldn't
Mr.
see you
Chairman.
down there, Representative.
How are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. And you?
Fine, sir. Thank
Take it
you.
away.
Thank you. My question has to do with the state fee, user fees. Do you know how much of that is dedicated to federal matching dollars?
Mr. Chairman, we can certainly get that information to you fairly quickly. We'll just have to do a little bit of digging, but we can get that to you today.
Thank you.
Okay. Any follow-up, Representative?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to move over to the last blue box there at the top. It is other state revenue. We'll dig into this a little bit in here in a minute or two, but generally speaking, this is largely federal mineral royalties, severance tax revenue, and then other revenue. And we'll get into those details here in just a few slides, Mr. Chairman. So basically, all of this revenue comes into WYDOT, and we have two appropriating bodies in the organization. One is the Transportation Commission, and then one is you folks as the legislature. You can see starting on the left, the Transportation Commission is responsible for and appropriates approximately 84% of WYDOT's total budget, or for 21, about $732 million. You folks on the legislative side appropriate about 138 million, or about 16% of the total budget. And then the two big squares that correspond to those two are really just examples of the types of programs that the commission is responsible for and that you folks are responsible for from a legislative perspective. I will mention here that the reason that there are two budgeting bodies for WYDOT is that back in 1991, I believe there was reorganization of state government, where that's when the highway department became a department of transportation. And as part of that, we took on a lot of mission. We took on aeronautics, we took on DMV functions, we took on some motor vehicle registration functions. And that, when it came over to us, remained under legislative appropriation control. And so that's when we basically went to kind of two appropriating bodies at the DOT.
Dennis, can I ask a favor? Can you get just a little closer to your microphone for us?
Yeah, sure.
As close as you can, anyway.
You bet.
Okay, thanks.
Is that better,
Please
Mr.
proceed.
Chairman?
Senator Anderson.
Does that still make a lot of sense to have that split that way? Does the legislature really need to be in on the funding of those agencies?
Mr. Byrne, that's one of those moments I alluded to start the meeting today. We'll throw
Mr.
you out
Chairman,
into deeper water there.
Mr. Chairman, it is certainly a policy decision for the legislature. I'll leave the decisions up to the legislature, but I can say, Mr. Chairman, that it is a challenge for us. I think it would be untruthful to say otherwise, but I will leave the policy decisions to you folks.
Senator Anderson, follow up on that. Any additional thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, it looks to me like we ought to do some work on that. Thanks.
Mr. Byrne, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next slide, please, Rodney. So, Mr. Chairman, what we're looking at here, and this is important for us to really kind of talk about and understand, this is our revenue trend, and this is total revenue to WYDOT since 1996. What we've done is added a red line to this revenue trend that's a statistical analysis, a statistical trend line of what our revenues have done from 1996 to 2010, and then from 2010 to 2020. So you can see that from 1996 to 2010, we had a steadily increasing revenue source. It was at least matched with inflation, Mr. Chairman, which allowed us to continue to do capacity and mobility type projects, and allowed us to continue to preserve the assets that we had. Since 2010, Mr. Chairman, our revenue has been mostly flat. And actually, if you take 2021 out of that calculation, you'll see that our revenue trend is actually a slight decline over those years. This graph also shows you that from 2010 through 2020, what our kind of our average total revenues have been, and that's where I came up with the $550 million to $700 million on a fiscal annual year basis. You can see that there. 2021 is going to adjust and affect that trend just a little bit, Mr. Chairman, but it's important to kind of understand this. And there's an important tie on the next slide to not just revenue, but our ability to maintain mission given the revenue that we have. So if there are no questions on this slide, Mr. Chairman, I will go ahead and move on to the next.
So another way to look at that is that we're trying to fix roads. In 2008, you could get a lot more bang for your dollar than you can today. I'm sure that inflation has has really eaten that alive. I don't know if you've done any calculations on that, Mr. Byrne, but you know, what percentage of that money has gone away from since 2008 is one way to look at it.
Right. Mr. Chairman, it's a very important point and a very good lead into the next slide. So thank you for that. This slide that you're looking at right now takes into account actual buying power trends since 2010. So what the yellow columns represent, Mr. Chairman, are 2010 dollars. And you can see that our buying trend has declined. And again, if you remove fiscal year 2021 out of this calculation, they have declined significantly due to the impacts of inflation. Now, we used fourth quarter Wyoming cost of living index dollars here because we are more than just construction. A lot of what we do is construction, but we're more than that. So this is based on actual inflationary rates fourth quarter for Wyoming. And it does have a significant impact to our ability to continue to deliver mission, Mr. Chairman, to your point.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you look at these graphs, we're looking visually, it's easy to see that taking YDOT off the general fund has been a major influence on this graph. Is there more than that we're not seeing here? A combination of things that have flattened the revenue stream? Thank you.
Mr. Byrne.
Mr. Chairman, yes, very good question. And the answer to that is yes. And I believe another very good lead in to our next slide. And Rodney, I'll go ahead and actually go bring up page 4. So this is to your point, Representative Obermuller. YDOT used to receive significantly more severance tax and federal mineral royalty revenues from the state. Most of you are aware of the DEarmarking that took place back in, I believe, 2001 legislative period, where YDOT, the formulas were basically changed and YDOT started to receive fewer federal mineral royalties and severance taxes. The net effect of DEarmarking, now this includes all of the general funds that you folks have appropriated to us. So this is a net impact since 2002 is just over $1 billion of revenue that YDOT did not realize as a result of DEarmarking. So to your point, Representative Obermuller, yes, it's more than just general funds. It's been other policy decisions as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at this, Dennis, could you hazard a guess, and that's probably what it'd be, considering the current federal government's moratorium on drilling on federal land, if that continues, what it will do to the FMR portion of your graph and your funding?
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chair. What we know right now, or what we suspect we know right now, is that at least for the short to midterm, so 3 to 5 years, the $200 million cap, there'll be enough revenue in federal mineral royalties and severance tax to be able to distribute up to that $200 million cap. And all of the revenues that YDOT receives currently for federal mineral royalties and severance tax are under the cap. So at least in the short term, with nothing else changing, if there were no formula changes to federal mineral royalties or severance taxes, YDOT would still get its full distribution for FMR and severance tax. And again, that's an if the formulas don't change.
Mr. Co-Chairman. Okay, Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, back to Representative Obermuller's question about the coming off the general fund. The DEarmarking is different than coming off the general fund. Do we have a graph that shows coming off the general fund and how that affected us?
Mr. Chairman, we can show you I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
No, you're good. You're good. Please continue.
Mr. Chairman, we can show you where we were receiving it. But ultimately the impact is, it leads and contributes to this $354 million. So we are showing it. It really kind of shows up in our unfunded needs. But Rodney, I'm going to ask you to drill into the detail revenue, please, so we can see that, please.
So just to interject, committee, having served on
Let's go
appropriations,
to
I
this.
know that
Yeah, go to the
you
one
could
with
hear
the
from your co-chairman as well on this point, but after de-earmarking, it was interesting to see that what happened with our general funds generally ended up in the Department of Health and the Department of Corrections. If you want to see that shift, that's really what happened in our state government. And starting in about 2012, Mr. Co-Chairman, that's about when we undertook necessary state steps to try to balance that back in a different direction. That's when you saw some of the reductions in the budgets begin that have gotten us to today. But Senator Anderson's right that de-earmarking is a little bit different thing than just taking the department off of the general funds. And Mr. Burr, maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to talk specifically about the general funds first and kind of make a connection there, if you'll recall, YDOT was taken off the general fund, and on this graph, the general fund represents those columns that are in green, kind of in the middle from 2005 through roughly 2015 or 17. And so you can see that we received some general funds over time, and then they went to zero. The policy decision at the time from the legislature was to increase registration and driver's license fees to offset the reduction in the removal of the general funds. And this is important to remember. There was no net increase to YDOT in the increase of registration fees and driver's license. It was actually in the first couple of years, there was a net revenue loss. So the replacement of the general funds with registration fees and driver's license did not offset those general funds that were removed. Now, over time, if Wyoming continues to grow, will some of that money come back? Maybe. It certainly will lose a lot of buying power in that time frame as well, Mr. Chairman. So
it wasn't a supplement, it was a supplant.
it was a complete supplant, Mr. Chairman, which makes choices for you folks difficult, right? Because then you eat into the capacity of being able to increase registrations and driver's license to affect a net increase to YDOT's revenue. So decisions were made, policy decisions, and those are your decisions to make, and we understand that, but they do have real impacts and ramifications to our ability to deliver mission.
Committee, anything on this particular slide or this particular topic? Okay, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are now on slide 6 or page 6. And Mr. Chairman, I apologize. Your books are probably not tabbed well. So when I say slide 6, if you look at the top right, sorry, page 5, I cannot count apparently.
So committee will, in your packet, go on through to the page that's marked revenue, and it's the very next page after the revenue page, okay?
And I
Okay,
will slow
please.
down just a little bit, Mr. Chairman, so you folks can catch up, or you can certainly look at the
I
screen.
think we're set to go. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I in no way meant to imply. Just not sure how many of you folks have had breakfast this morning or enough coffee. 'Cause I
Mr.
have
Byrne,
not,
he's,
Mr.
the
Chairman.
senator's not as offended as he's acting like. So please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So slide 5 shows where that anticipated revenue is coming from. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go ahead and start on the biggest portion of the pie here. And you can see that that's our federal aid. And again, I'm going to repeat myself here, and it's not meant to offend anyone. It's really, we understand that the more you hear it, the more it sinks in. So keep in mind that this federal aid is not just highway dollars, it's federal transit dollars that go to the locals, and it's federal aeronautics money that go directly to the locals. The largest portion of this, of course, is our highway dollars. But again, federal aid accounts for 58% of YDOT's total revenue in fiscal year 21. Moving clockwise.
Senator Anderson.
That federal aid, is that all matched? Or is it
Mr.
not
Chairman,
necessarily?
Mr. Chairman, for the most part, the answer is yes. The omnibus dollars that we talked about yesterday, that the director talked about, the 63.5, that was 100% federal, but that's rare.
So just to dig a little deeper on that, Mr. Byrne, that the funds that Senator Anderson is talking about are contained within this part of the pie and are contingent upon us coming up with state dollars to match them. Is that what?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay. Just making sure I understand that.
Yeah, and those state dollars are in some of these other slices of pie that we're going to go over now. Those matching state dollars.
Mr. Chairman, and that is usually a 10%.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead,
generally,
Mr. Byrne.
yeah, generally speaking, that is the average.
Okay. Okay, committee. Anything? Okay, please proceed. Mr.
Thank you,
Byrne.
Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to go to the next pie, section of the pie, and that is fuel taxes. And this is, of course, our diesel and gasoline collections, the state portion that goes to IDOT. You can see that in 2021 that it counts for about 11% of our anticipated budget. Now, Mr. Chairman, I do want to clarify something here. We made adjustments to the fiscal year 21 budget because of anticipated impacts of COVID and reduced traffic. Those reductions are reflected in this fuel tax amount. And quite frankly, we were very conservative in how much we thought YDOT was going to be impacted. So the likelihood is we're going to realize more than what you're seeing here in terms of fuel tax. You heard the director talk yesterday. What we actually realized in terms of reduced revenue due to fuel tax collections was about $3.5 million. So we anticipate that there will be a reduced revenue collection of fuel tax, but it won't be quite this low. We were very conservative in our estimates.
So, Mr. Byrne, just to tie that together for the committee, you remember yesterday, committee, that we talked about the drafting of a piece of legislation to retrieve some of these funds that were lost. That 3.5 million, just referenced by Mr. Byrne, that was one of the line items that we talked about yesterday, just to clarify. And we'll look at that on the 21st of June and discuss it and decide if we go forward to a special session. But that is revenue that we didn't realize because of that pandemic. So,
Mr. Chairman.
okay, so Senator Papp.
Yeah, thank you. I just so I'm clear in my mind, and any of these fuel taxes in the blue portion, that's all just our state portion of the fuel tax. All federal fuel tax rebates are in the green portion.
Mr.
Byrne?
Chairman, yes, that is correct, Senator Pappas, and that is distributed back to us via the federal formulas.
Okay, Representative McGuire. And then we'll go to Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So looking at this one, which has federal sources, I'm just trying to determine where is the breakout for the federal fuel tax, which I think is 18.4%, 18.4 cents per gallon. Where is that shown in either of these?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to Mr.
Maybe
Fryer.
that's on the next couple of pages, if you're looking for where Representative McGuire is at, and Mr. Byrne.
Mr. Chairman, Rodney Fryer, Budget Manager for YDOT. To Representative McGuire's question, the federal fuel tax goes to DC and the federal government, and then those funds are given back to us via the federal formula, which attributes to the federal apportionments that are in the green. But there's no direct federal fuel tax shown in our budget, if that answers the question.
Thank you, Mr. Fryer. Representative.
Okay,
I think the question, Mr. Fryer, is where does that money come back in on page 200 federal sources? Where is that
Yeah.
reflected? Mr. Byrne, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, so if you look on the federal sources, you see Highway Improvement Program. That's the federal distribution of those fuel taxes, of those federal fuel taxes based on the formula distribution.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could add just a little bit, and really it's a good news story, is we actually give back more federal money than we put in terms of fuel taxes. We're what's called a recipient state. And much to the unhappiness of donor states like Texas. So at the federal government, they've actually realized that, hey, there's lots of miles and few people in the state of Wyoming. And so the federal government in their formula actually takes federal fuel tax money from other states and reallocates it to us. So when you hear a discussion at the federal level about formula, it's a really important discussion to pay attention to. And Senator Brasso, we always thank him because he was the head of the committee that sets that formula. And so it's been helpful to Western states to have that there. He's left. We think the formula will stay the same. Don't know. It could always change, but it's an important discussion to pay attention to at the federal level.
Gentlemen, that's really helpful. I was not aware of that. That is helpful, committee, for us to take that to the chambers of commerce and the folks we visit with. So there is a little bit of an adjustment to help us with things like I-80. It's unfortunately not enough, but Mr. Byrne, please continue. I think we're good to go on that.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, Representative Henderson, my apologies.
No worries, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to ask this question. You know, yesterday someone said that our delegation was not going to submit any inputs for so-called earmarks. But if you look at the information, this is very good information. We have about 5 counties that take a lot of our money. And I would like to ask, and you can get back to me, but what more, if anything, can we do to get more federal dollars? Building on the director's point, but also just simply the fact that we're a developing state as well. I mean, we're not just a recipient state, we're a leading state, if you will, in energy and other ways. I think there's a terrific opportunity, perhaps, by maybe not calling it earmarks, maybe identifying some ways to repurpose some of these dollars that are in here now and is planning for the future projects. And there's a lot of future projects tagged in here. So I'm asking, what more, if anything, can we do to get more federal dollars for Wyoming with the assistance of our delegation? Thank you.
Who wants to take that one? Mr. Byrne?
Mr. Chairman, I'll start, and I'm sure the director may have something to add or subtract as he sees fit. Mr. Chairman, it's a good question, and we ask ourselves the same question constantly. There was some discussion yesterday of, I think it was related to the counties, specifically to grant writers, and having somebody dedicated to grant writing from the federal perspective. So WYDOT does have a grants and contracts program. We also have a management services program. Those two programs work in unison to identify all available funding, all available federal funding sources. And they basically provide us a list over time. And then the executive management team decides which grants we're going to apply for. So I think in terms of what's out there today, we do a very good job of really trying to utilize every piece of federal dollar that we can. Now keep in mind, Mr. Chairman, and you'll see some of this as we move through the presentation. We'll go into more detail, but we do well federally. We do very well federally, both from a formula perspective that the director just mentioned, and our efforts to continually apply for discretionary grants, federal discretionary grants. The key component in all of that is state dollars. You have to have state dollars to match those federal dollars. And for us, it's not federal dollars that concern us. It's the state dollars. We have stopped applying for certain federal grants because we simply don't have the state dollars to be able to match them. So we're very cautious about what federal grants we apply for, and based on our available state dollars.
You know, Mr. Byrne, just real quickly, and then I'm going to go down to Representative Baker and a follow-up for Representative Henderson. But that's a very important point that's come up in discussions in other areas, like in the Department of Health. Even if it's a 90-10 match, if you don't have the 10, you can't go after the 90. And so I appreciate that thought. Representative Henderson, follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there's a very good answer on the spot like that. I'm talking about situationally right now, thinking outside the box. I mean, on an ongoing basis, grants, that there's opportunity there. But I'm talking about what more can we do now, given the circumstances, of ARPA, CARES, ARPA, and so on, and who knows what's coming next, to be prepared and use our delegation to our best interest, for our best interest, as they all work very hard for us. But what can we do to think outside the box and get more federal money? There's 49 other states doing everything they can to get more federal money. So I think we should be thinking, how can we do more? And given the corridor issues, with the interstate and so on, what more can we do to help our delegation understand, here's an opportunity in different parts of Wyoming to satisfy some of our future project requirements in the next 24 months rather than, 48, 16 months out. Thank you. Would you agree?
Gentlemen, I like the way the representative is thinking and great questions that he's asking. So Director, thoughts on that?
You bet, Mr. Chairman and Representative Henderson. I would, it's a valid question you asked that we're always asking, because as Mr. Byrne discussed, we're kicking over every rock we can to find fiscal resources, and we'll keep doing that. And as he says, on the federal side, we think we're doing really well. We think he can always do better. We have certainly, as we work through these bills, been in contact with the congressional offices, and some of the comments have been, hey, we'll work some of these issues in the bill. If there's some other ideas that somebody has, we'll certainly pursue them. But you ask a valid question. And I'm not sure that we don't have hey, here's what we can do, here's what we can do. I think, as you're discussing the issue with our federal delegation, if you come to, hey, how about we try this, we'll be happy to work it through the system. And we'll keep working with the congressional team. I mean, we have an office that does that, and we're always cognizant of, hey, is there something else we should be doing? But you know what? We look at it every day, and if somebody with fresh eyes has a better, different, more outside the box idea, hey, we're in, and we'll follow up on it.
I appreciate that, Director. And, Representative Henderson, by the end of the day, if we decide that we maybe want to send a piece of mail back to our delegation, for example, from this committee, that's certainly something we could talk about at the end of the day too. So appreciate that. Let's go to Representative Baker, and then we'll come to Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate this. I just want to build on this a little bit, because we were at a tour yesterday at a county facility, and one of the things that was mentioned is that county is using and trying to utilize the federal dollars available to build a road from BLM property to BLM property. And that to me was something that was kind of interesting, because I don't know that, that's necessarily an approach, but I think that, that little tidbits of information like that, where we can get together with the county and maybe, kill two birds with one stone. And then the other thing is, I was just wondering, would it be possible in the future, and maybe not now, to leverage future CARES type money where we get 100% with no match requirement, to utilize a portion of that just in the matching portion of other projects? And I just wonder if we'd be able to do something like that.
Thank you, Representative. Mr. Byrne or Director, who wants to? Any thoughts on that front?
Yeah.
Working with the county so we can work to leverage BLM, Forest Service.
Right.
Go ahead.
And Mr. Chairman, generally speaking, we do work very closely with the counties. They do seek WYDOT's input and help often, and we provide that often. With regard to the CARES Act funding, we're applying for everything that we believe is within the current guidance set out by the CARES Act funding. And so we've submitted, as the director spoke yesterday, we've submitted based CARES 1, CARES 2, some of the stuff that the ARPA, we continue to submit projects that we think meet the criteria provided by U.S. Treasury Department. So, Mr. Chairman, I think the director had something else he wanted to add.
Director, go ahead.
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Mr. Chairman and Representative Baker. So typically, what I heard in your question was, can we use CARES money to match other federal dollars? And typically that's against the rules. You can't use federal money to match federal money. So the match has to come from the state and from the entity that's supporting it. The other item that I would share with you, because and this goes back to Representative Henderson's question about other sources. There is one source that we have not tapped, and it's been a policy decision by us. You could change it if you so desired, but we have not gone down the road of borrowing money to build roads. And so there is effort, there is money available through an application process to borrow money and to build roads, but you have to pay it back, and it has to be paid back, and there's states that do that. And sometimes when you wonder, how's that other state getting those roads? They borrow the money. And then what happens is the formula money that we've talked about today, a large portion of that then starts going back to paying back, the debt, the money that you borrowed. And we have just made a policy decision that was not something that interested us. And we have opted not to pursue that source of funding. Obviously, if you had further guidance or you wanted to change our mind, that's again your decision. But I just share that just in terms of going back to your question: is there other money available? Well, actually, we could borrow money, but we just really didn't want to get that business.
Director, I just looked at my banker, Senator Furphy, and he was shaking his head no. So we're.
Thank you. But again, I guess in full disclosure, yes, there is some others. But
Thank you for that. Representative McGuire, I think you were next.
Quickly, Mr. Chairman,
Uh,
I'm just
Representative
saying,
Henderson, follow
sorry,
up on
just
that.
really
and then we'll
quick,
go to
really quick,
Representative
sir.
McGuire.
Thank you. I'm just saying that I don't want to borrow anything. I don't want to just can't stand on the usual grant process. Those are options. But I want to take this opportunity to get every single penny we can, in the next 12 to 48 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative McGuire, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the other topics of discussion when we visited County Road and Bridge was the recently completed bridge just below Alcova Dam, where they used, I think it was CHBP funds, which you guys helped them get that grant. So it was a 90-10 grant with 10% match. My question is, when you're looking at those matching funds, can you look at county funds also, or does it have to be state funds?
How does that work, Mr. Burke? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, we certainly look at locals' ability to fund those matches as well. So if it's a county project and federal dollars, we will typically look to the counties for the match for that local match.
By the way, I wanted to share during that tour yesterday that county was very appreciative of the help they get at the state level, and even alluded to the fact that they tap into the resources of the grant expertise that you guys have. But I think that position probably gets stretched very thin. And you've got 23 counties out here, that could probably benefit from any grant help that we could give them. So just wanted to point that out. Let's proceed, Mr. Byrne, unless there's questions. Thoughts? Okay, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But before we leave fuel tax, I do want to point one thing out, and you'll hear this. You have heard it from us in the past, and you'll hear it from again in the future. With regard to fuel taxes, we really see fuel tax as a net revenue decline over time, right? And we all know the reasons, and you folks were briefed, I think, in great detail on those reasons. But I do want to just bring that up again. Mr. Chairman, moving around the pie again to registrations. The registration, the red slice here, this is vehicle registrations and just vehicle registration. That's both commercial and passenger type vehicles. That accounts for almost 10% of our total revenue. Driver's license accounts for about 7 million, or about 0.8%. The next slice you see is vehicle fees for about $11 million. These are largely, not entirely, but they are largely oversized weight and oversized vehicle fees.
Mr. Byrne, that's just the state portion, right? Because on a couple of these items, some of that goes to county, right?
Mr. Chairman, yes, you are correct. This is just the state portion.
Okay, thank you.
The next slice is the federal and mineral royalties that we discussed earlier. This is the 64.5 million is the under the $200 million cap distribution that YDOT receives annually. And Mr. Chairman, I do want to point out how important these funds are to us, not just from a total net revenue perspective, but also because of the flexibility they provide YDOT. You'll recall me talking earlier about highway user fees being restricted constitutionally. So there are some things we cannot spend those highway user fee dollars on. The federal mineral royalties and the severance taxes provides us the flexible state funding to be able to do portions of our mission, including executive protection, matching federal dollars for aeronautics, federal transit, and some others as well, Mr. Chairman. So they are important to us. And then down near the bottom of the pie, you see the other, and I'm going to ask Mr. Fryer to go ahead and drill in here so that we can kind of talk about this. The thing I want to point out first on this slide, this represents what the other revenues are. And you can see the thing at the very bottom, you'll see carryover, and it accounts for the largest portion of other funds.
If you proceed about 6 or 7 turns of your pages, committee, you will find other revenue.
Okay.
And that's the slide that we're on up on the screen. Okay, so if you just keep going, I think you can get to other revenue.
Mr. Chairman, I did notice that Senator Anderson was the first person there, so I just wanted to point that out for everyone.
You know, generally, he's way out ahead of us, you know. Mr. Bird, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr.
Get a little
Chairman.
deep here, so I'll just let you take us out of there.
Thank you. So,
All right.
Mr. Chairman, the $67 million in carryover, I do want to explain what that is, and I do want to point out that it's unusual. Because of COVID, Mr. Chairman, we were very cautious and conservative about how we spent monies in fiscal year 20. We did not know the full impact to us fiscally and financially that COVID would have. So we really drew back a lot of spending. Now, that's not sustainable. It wasn't sustainable, and we knew it wasn't going to be sustainable, but we didn't want to overspend the revenues that we anticipated receiving. So it turns out we had more revenues for the reasons that I've discussed earlier. And so what we do then is we then program that carryover in 21. So that money will be programmed and it will be put to good use, but you don't normally see a carryover amount that large. And so, but I did want to point it out to you because it does stick out. And so then you can just go down the list, Mr. Chairman, at your leisure and see some of the other funds that we have under the category other.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, how do we get from 87 million to 89 million? I understand getting from 67 to 87 because you add up those totals, but I don't see how you get to 89 million.
Mr. Chairman, near the top of the page, there's a subtotal below flight service and the state radio networks of 1.88 million. If you add that to the 87 point, roughly 6 million, you get to the 89.
I'm not seeing that line item. Up to.
Third line, 1 million.
The subtotal. Subtotal, you add those two subtotals together.
That's some of the tricks.
I'm a journalism major, not a math major, so thank you, Mr. Byrne. Please
Mr. Chairman,
continue.
I just stumbled into that.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm just curious, do you take a line item for penalty fees for your contractors that may be late or something? Is that do you carry that as a liability or how do you do that?
Mr. Chairman, I think, Ronnie, do you know the answer to that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, we don't carry a line item. That's all handled within the construction program, the highway improvement program, just based on those individual projects, if there does happen to be penalties.
Please proceed. Mr. Chairman. Oh, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick follow-up to that question. Do you go after those penalties? Do you enforce the penalty clauses? I'm just curious because I've worked construction and it was always an argument with contractors. I always enforce them. And that it cost contractors a lot of money, but the next one managed to get things done on time and on budget.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen,
Mr. Chairman, yes, we do. We enforce the contract. So.
okay, please. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you tell me where the revenue from the new RIS system is reflected in here?
Mr. Chairman, good question. And we have not received any of that revenue just yet. That takes effect July 1. So what you'll see is that revenue show up in our in the third quarter modification under the other revenue when we start receiving it. Actually, it's a driver's license increase, so you'll see it under the driver's license revenue when we start to actually receive that funding.
Okay, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, on that point, because as part of that legislation, we needed to account for that money separately. And so we will have it in a separate fund that you'll be able to see the balance of that fund, but it'll also be reflected in the driver's license revenue here. Mr. Chairman, moving on to slide 6. So, Mr. Chairman, here we talk about total fuel collections. This slide shows the gasoline total collections that we anticipate receiving. This is total collections. This isn't just YDOT collections. So again, conservative estimate of $70 million. We anticipate receiving more than that. We'll know more in the third quarter. So how the formula works is money comes off the top of those distributions for state parks, for off-road vehicles, motorboats and snowmobiles. And LUST comes off the top as well, Mr. Chairman. And LUST, for those of you who may not be familiar with that, is leaking underground storage. YDOT receives that entire funding. We receive the funding and we utilize it in our budget. What happens is a like amount is taken from over the cap severance taxes and is provided to the DEQ to fix leaking underground storage. And I believe that program has been expanded for remediation of waste sites as well, garbage sites as well. So again, we keep the money, we report that amount, and over the cap severance is then sent to DEQ by the state for them to do those remediation activities.
Mr. Byrne, at one time, I think it was back on my appropriation days, I thought I remembered that we were nearing the end of that effort. Is that something that's ever going to end? I suppose if we've shifted over to landfill remediation, maybe we'll never get rid of it, but what can you tell me on that?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know the answer to that question, but I think the co-chair may have some information. for us.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last I had heard from DEQ, we were kind of in the final stretch of taking care of those underground storage tanks. And they're looking at wrapping up that program here probably in the next couple of years. We will have taken care of a lot of underground damage from leaking tanks, a lot of remediation. And at that point, probably need to decide what to do with that one penny, whether to keep it, assign it to something else, or just let it go away. Right now, some of it is going to cease and transfer on landfills. Casper doesn't have that problem, but a lot of our smaller communities without that funding from the state could not afford to close their landfills. I know my own local one, I believe in the end, it cost close to $12 million to close the landfill. And that money is helping out tremendously to especially our smaller communities that cannot afford it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Please proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So after we've taken those things off of the top of the total fuel tax, we then distribute the remaining gasoline tax as you see it here, 15% to cities, 14% to the county road fund, 13.5% to the counties, and then YDOT receives 57.5% of the gasoline distribution. Moving on to page 7, Mr. Chairman. This graph just depicts what happens on the diesel collections. Again, the same thing basically happens here. We anticipate receiving $73 million worth of diesel fuel total collections. We will take LUST off the top. We also take a a 2% fuel tax distribution admin per state statute that goes directly to YDOT. And then the rest is distributed 5% cities, 20% counties, and 75% to the state highway fund.
Just out of curiosity, Mr. Byrne, has the diesel tax total been climbing? I would imagine over these past few years.
Mr. Chairman, we actually saw a decline in diesel fuel for quite a while, and it was national economy related. We did start to see a recovery in the diesel fuel collections, and then COVID hit, and so we're still down a little bit based on the 3-year average. But I do anticipate that for a time we may see an increase. But again, back to the statement made earlier, over time, we do understand fuel tax will be a declining revenue source.
Just knowing the shift in our culture and society and what's going on out there, how many things we're shipping, and I guess intuitively, you just think that would be rising, but thank you for that.
My pleasure, Mr.
Please
Chairman.
proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go ahead and move to slide 8 here. And this graph really just kind of depicts when you combine both the gasoline taxes and the diesel fuel taxes, and you take out the distributions to state parks and the less distributions, this graph shows that YDOT receives about 66.65% of the total fuel tax, state fuel tax collected in Wyoming. If you add the less distribution into that, the less portion that YDOT keeps, it's you can see that at the bottom right part of the graph there. It's about, or the page, it's about 67.61% of the total distribution. Mr. Chairman, I do want to go to a map here. Most of you folks are very familiar with this slide, and it just shows neighboring states' gas and diesel fuel taxes. And with the exception of Colorado, of course, YDOT has the lowest fuel taxes in the region.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've always been curious that Colorado, in that one particular aspect, has a lower tax than we do. Do they have some other offsetting mechanism? Do they have higher registration fees or something that offsets that?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Byrne?
Yeah, their tax structure in general is obviously different than Wyoming. They have an income tax. They do have higher registration fees in some regards, but their entire tax structure is obviously different than Wyoming. So they are making up that revenue elsewhere.
Okay, Mr. Committee, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Byrne, is it safe to say that because Wyoming has lower fuel taxes, then I'll just pick the two east-west states, Utah and Nebraska, that at times that puts us at a disadvantage on the international fuel tax apportionment?
Mr. Chairman, it's a good question and an astute one. Yes, Mr. Chairman, it does. We're paying lower fuel tax in most cases, and yet it's distributed back to the state. So if the truck drives, through, fuels up in Wyoming, pays a lower fuel tax, and then drives into a neighboring state, IFTA is reimbursing that neighboring state at the rate that their tax supports. So they're reimbursing them at the higher tax rate based on their tax rate and the miles used in that state. So.
Follow.
Go ahead,
Mr.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
So, Mr. Byrne, and this is just educational. So in other words, what we could end up doing is actually, if a truck goes through Nebraska and Wyoming, we would actually have to pay Nebraska more money back. In effect, they get a higher return from that IFTA than we would. We in effect pay Nebraska because they have a higher tax. Is that a way to look at it?
Mr. Chairman, my
Mr. Byrne?
understanding is exactly that. Yes.
Mr. Byrne, that relates to when we did the 10-cent increase, a few years ago. That relates to the fact that it was not reflected at the pump. Is that correct? Because of the distribution of fuel.
Mr. Chairman, I think that was part of it. The other part is, the suppliers and the distributors it's impacting their profit margin, but we're not seeing as high a rate at the pump. So I think it's twofold.
Yeah, that's a pretty deep and extended subject. I mean, we could go into fuel
Yes.
tax distribution. and
Yes.
Spend the whole afternoon, but anyway, it's good to at least be aware of that committee so Mr. Byrne, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe we are now on slide 8, 9. Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, we talked about the revenues and where those revenues come from. Now we've come to the portion of the presentation where we talk about where those revenues are expended. So, Mr. Chairman, again, I'd like to start at the largest portion of the pie, which is the Highway Improvement Program. We anticipate spending about 60% of our entire budget on the Highway Improvement Program. These are largely dollars that go out the door in contracts to contractors and consultants for highway improvement type projects. There is some labor in here for contract administration for design work, but the majority of it goes out the door to construction contracts. Moving clockwise around the pie, Mr. Chairman, we then have maintenance and operations, which account for almost 13% of the total expenditures, $112 million. These are maintenance activities that are conducted by our forces at WYDOT. So overlays, striping, line painting, snow removal, et cetera. Those are WYDOT forces doing that work. Then we move to planning and administration, and I'm going to ask Mr. Fryer to go ahead and dig in here so that we can see the details here up on the screen. So this is both planning at the top, almost $10 million of planning, that's highway planning. And then as you go around clockwise, you can see that my operation, the chief technology operation, Mr. Fryer's operation, and then some overhead expenditures for civil rights, compliance and investigation, the grants and the contracts program that I mentioned earlier as part of the Transportation Administration. Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to talk about all these unless you'd like me to, but this is a graphical representation of what planning and administration is.
Mr. Byrne, what's the civil rights office piece?
Mr. Chairman, that is actually a program that reports to the director. And it has to do with civil rights, mostly connected to highway projects, making sure that federal requirements with regard to civil rights are being followed on highway construction projects. And
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up a little bit on that. So lots of federal requirements in terms of specifically what we look at is DBE, disadvantaged business enterprise. And there's a certain percentage of contractors that per federal law must fit into either minority or some other specific sectors of our society. And so that's my office. It's a 3-man office that focuses on that. And I'm happy to report that we are making those numbers because the ramifications, if you don't, are fairly significant. So there's that we also, part of that, of the responsibility of that office would be ADA compliance on our roads. So again, it gets into some of the requirements that one probably doesn't think about when you start building roads in terms of, federal laws and meeting those federal requirements.
Thank you for that. Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Back to the graph here. Moving around, you have capital expenditures and then other expenditures, and I'm sure you have questions about other expenditures, so we'll go ahead and dive in here. We do have a technology transfer. That's about $450,000 to the University of Wyoming. Our highway safety group, their budget is included in here. Some of the DBE costs that the director discussed just a minute ago, rec trails, license plate production. And then I believe that the largest part of that is our federal rural transit program. Again, those are federal dollars that are passed straight through to the locals for their rural transit program. So buses, rural transit bus programs, I think some senior citizen type buses, those things at the locals. So that 40 million does not directly benefit WYDOT's operations. It is a direct pass through.
So, Mr. Byrne, just off the top of your head, how many communities in Wyoming have a transit system? Do you have any ideas on that? I know we've got one here. I think Cheyenne has one.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we have 42 transit programs across the state, which
Really?
was far more than I had anticipated.
Yeah.
There's, it's interesting how that funding works is the city of Casper and Cheyenne receive, are authorized because they're above 60,000 in population to receive money directly from the Federal Transit Authority. All the others are required by law to be a straight pass through. And those things could range from as small as 2 buses at your senior center in the middle of town to the University of Wyoming bus system. And the other big one we have would be the system up in Jackson of those buses driving around there. So from big to small, but there's 42 total.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, I know those are pass-through funds, but you do have to administer them and that sort of thing. Do you get a fee to administer those funds, or do you just in effect eat that cost?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, we're authorized to take a part of that federal money that we receive and allocate that to us for administrative costs.
Okay.
And so basically it's self-funding for us, and we aren't taking state resources to administer the program.
Okay. Any other questions? Representative McGuire?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What is the University of Wyoming Technology Transfer, and what does the T2/LTAP stand for? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Byrd?
our chief engineer would be able to answer that question. Maybe do you know, Director?
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, to the best of my knowledge, here's what it is. We have a team of individuals at the University of Wyoming that we support in terms of research. And we also have a fairly robust recruiting program there to try and suck in engineers, because what we've found is the best source of engineers is actually from the university, and you need to capture them early. So we have what we call the design squad. And so it's within the College of Engineering, and we bring those men and women on. We let them work for us in the summer. We treat them special during the school year, and then our successes when they come to work for us. And it's been very successful for us. And I see it as essential to continue because it's really because of what we pay. It's very difficult for us to recruit entry-level engineers. And so you really got to sort of say, hey, isn't this a cool place to work? You get to stay here close to home. And so that's really, it's our association with the university in both of those research programs and the ability to recruit.
Follow-up, Representative? Just anecdotally, I have a son who benefited from that program. In fact, was one of the engineers that helped to develop the first underpass, the wildlife underpass over by Kemmer. And very successful program, and it means a lot to those students. So appreciate that, Director.
You bet, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Senator Pappas.
Just another anecdotal thought. I'm on the advisory board at the College of Engineering, and they do have a driving simulator over there that someday, if we ever have a meeting, I think this committee would be beneficial for us to see the research that they do. I've seen it, but it would be great for the rest of us to see it if we ever find ourselves in Laramie.
I appreciate that suggestion, Senator. I was not aware of that simulator, and we'll have to do that. So, okay, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just finishing out this graph above the other expenditures, you see the operating transfers out. That is transfers to other state agencies for services rendered to WYDOT. So ETS, ANI, AG's office, that's what's in that. Support services, that's motor vehicle registration, driver's license groups that are expensed there. Administration, that's the director and his programs that report directly to him. And then we have WildLink, which you folks are very familiar with. Aeronautics, $52 million or 6% of our budget. And then of course, law enforcement, almost 6% at $51 million, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to the next slide, Mr. Chairman. We'll talk here just a little bit about WYDOT positions. This is just a chart of the number of positions that WYDOT has available back to 2002. And what this graph does not show is the most recent HR consolidation. I think we consolidated 14 positions down to ANI HRD. So our actual total as of today is 2,052 positions. So that you can see that since 2004, Mr. Chairman, that our total YDOT positions has declined by approximately 10%. Mr. Chairman, there is information on your packet about how those positions were cut over time and the reasons for that. So next slide, please. Mr. Chairman, you heard me talk earlier about the direct pass-through dollars to locals, to cities and counties. This chart just represents those dollars. They happen in three major areas that I've already discussed: roads and highways, airports, and then mass transit, Mr. Chairman, for about $108 million, or roughly 12.5% of our fiscal year 21 budget. Next slide, please. Mr. Chairman, we had a presentation on this yesterday. This really represents the unfunded need in those areas that YDOT is currently experiencing those unfunded needs. If there are any questions, Mr. Chairman, sure, I'd be happy to answer it, but I think you folks had quite a bit of information on that yesterday.
Anything, committee? Okay, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, slide 13. So this is the ratio of funding specific to the highway improvement program. So this is road construction and maintenance. Is this maintenance or just construction? This is just construction. Those contracted dollars that go out. Mr. Chairman, there's a couple of things that I want to point out on this graph. You can see the ratio itself, of course, in terms of state funds, state general funds, and federal dollars. You can see that in fiscal year 2021, that state funds account for roughly 20% of our total highway improvement program dollars, and that federal dollars account for about 80% of that program. Now, in some ways, this is good news, right? We're utilizing federal funds to pay for highway improvement. But Mr. Chairman, one thing that I do want to point out is the note at the bottom of that slide, and this information comes from the Federal Highway Administration itself, and the national average regarding funding ratios is 30% federal and 70% state. So what this really indicates is that other states are putting a significantly higher amount of state funds on highway improvement than that Wyoming currently is.
So, Mr. Byrne, my sheet indicates a national average of 60 federal and 40 state, but regardless of how you divide that up, do you ever anticipate the feds coming in with any dictate as to how much? Would that ever be affected in any way, do you think? By any mandate?
Mr. Chairman, I don't foresee that currently. Their mandate would be, that we just make the minimum match state to federal dollars.
Hopefully it'll stay at 10. So, yeah.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sorry.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, not for me, but I was asking for a friend. What's ARRA?
Mr. Chairman, good question. That was ARA, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, back in 2009 and 2010. And so that was, it was basically the stimulus package from the Obama administration.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned it was 2080, but that's just this year, right? Would you expect that we'll go back to the 2575 that we've seen in the last few years?
Mr. Chairman, I would, assuming that the federal dollars remain level with those years, I would anticipate that it would be closer to the 75-25. Mr. Chairman, with regard, just for point of clarification, I'm not sure. The 60-40 is an old number. The 30-70 is the most accurate number and most up-to-date number we have. And so I apologize that was not corrected in your packets.
No problem. Thank you. Please proceed.
Slide 14, Mr. Chairman. So this is just another way to look at inflation, but this inflationary estimate is based very specifically to construction costs. So what you could do for $1 in 1990 now takes roughly $3.50 in today's dollars. So the two lines represent actual dollars for construction over time in the year specified, and then the inflation adjusted dollars are in red below it. So, Mr. Chairman, again, it's just another way to kind of slice and dice the impacts of inflation and their impacts to our ability to maintain mission specific to highway construction over time.
Okay, please proceed. We're going to push on through.
Mr. Chairman, very
We're
good.
gonna
Slide 15.
conjecture
You
later
bet.
in the morning.
Mr. Chairman, this graph you folks have seen, and it's been discussed. It was discussed yesterday during the DI management. It had a little different look there, but this is basically the importance of timely preventative maintenance and the additional costs when you don't do preventative maintenance. So I think, the discussion yesterday was kind of the Fram example. You can pay me a little now or a lot later. This really is just a graphical representation of that. You can spend $1 in preventative maintenance now, or you can wait and it's going to cost you $4 to $8 later. So it's important that preventative maintenance is conducted and conducted timely.
Committee, this is my opinion, but having served on this committee before, this is one of the more important slides, I think, in the presentation this morning. I've heard from those who know that some of the base of the roads out there is becoming affected by our lack of attention. And it's not just that surface that we provide to the road, but it's everything underneath that that is beginning to show some deterioration. And so that's the concern, is it not, Mr. Byrne?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I could add just a bit there.
Please do. Mr.
Typically, what we're seeing today is if you go to that middle band, we think about 34% of our roads are in fair to poor condition. And I'm a trend type guy, and I really watch trends. And what we know is that our percentage of excellent and good roads is going down, and our percentage of fair and poor roads is becoming larger, which is really the inverse trend lines that we would like. And that's really the indication of we aren't meeting standards in terms of maintaining the asset that we have. And so there's probably another talking point on this graph.
Thank you, Director. And I think, committee, another way of looking at it too is that if you let it deteriorate to a certain point, then it's much more expensive to fix it, because you've got to go all the way into the base of the road. And that's when you get into the $1 million or $2 million per mile that we talk about. But anyway, please continue, Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are on the last slide. And so this is just a look at a different look at the funding ratio for the highway improvement dollars. You can see that the green column is the federal dollars, the general fund dollars that have been spent in those respective years, and then the state dollars for the total program, Mr. Chairman. Pretty straightforward. And Mr. Chairman, with that wraps up the presentation. I do want to point out a couple of things just quickly for you folks. We did provide the operating budget to you for your reference. We did not have any intention of going over it today, but what it really does is it matches this budget presentation and all the information that we just went over. And it really just, it slices and dices it just in a different way, more programmatically. And the operation budget really is the document that the commission approves in September of every year. And then we do quarterly modifications that the commission then looks at and considers and approves. So that information is there for you folks. The last thing that I want to mention to you folks, and then we'll stand for any questions, is it takes a little while for this information to absorb. Questions generally pop up sometime after the presentation. Something will come to mind. Please feel free to contact myself, the director, or Rodney directly. We'll be happy to answer any of the questions that you may have that pop up after this meeting is concluded. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Mr. Byrne, we know that you'll do that. And the Director, appreciate you guys. Mr. Fryer, thank you for being here. I want to thank you guys.
Mr. Chairman.
one moment, I'll finish a thought
you.
and then I'll come right to you, Representative. Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for the presentation and for providing all the information you did prior to this meeting. The co-chairman and I shared notes over the phone even, and it's been a really good read. I hope if you haven't gotten to all of it, committee, I really hope you'll take some additional time and go through the details. It helps for us to know what we're talking about. And so thank you for that. Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry for interrupting you when I did. Just a question on the graph that shows the history of the construction dollars that you just had. I think it was the last, that one there. You had talked earlier about how the non-general fund dollars were pretty stable because they were under the cap numbers. And as I look at it, the dollars have, sort of ticked up since 2012, and they've been sort of moving up. What is the additional piece there that's contributing to that increase? Is that the effect of fuel tax increases, or exactly what is it?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, good question. So what this represents is not total state revenue. It's just the state dollars that are being put on the highway improvement program. So as additional state dollars are required to match federal dollars, we have to take it from somewhere. So we take it from other operations and other mission within the organization. So it's not necessarily an increase in revenue, Mr. Chairman. It's the distribution of those revenues.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Representative.
Yeah, I appreciate that explanation. And I see that. So you look over on the federal side, and as those dollars are moving up, our obligation to match that goes up, and it puts a strain on our ability to do that, I suppose. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, it is, and more specifically to your question, and Mr. Fryer just reminded me of this, so thank you, Rodney. There was that 10-cent increase in fuel tax, so some of that is attributed to that increase as well, but some of that 10 cent is going to maintenance as well. So just want to clarify those things.
Okay, Representative Obermuller.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if you don't mind, if you could go to your operating budget and page 2 of the operating budget. And this is going to be a highly simplified question. But so when I look at the state sources, gasoline tax and diesel tax, give or take $100 million. And then when I drop down and look at the highway improvement program funds that we receive from the federal government, is it fair to say that there's about a 2.5 multiplier over what's collected in the state of Wyoming versus what we actually receive from the federal government?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn that question over to Rodney to let him answer.
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, that's not generally going to be the truth. Again, the federal funds are just contingent upon the apportionments. In the 2021 budget, the omnibus funding, the COVID, the $63.5 million, that's in the federal sources. And Mr. Byrne mentioned earlier, we do have some specific purpose grants that we were awarded, and one of those is in the 21 budget. You will see that on page 11, I believe. You'll see the omnibus funding and the grant funding that goes into these federal apportionments. So no, it's not generally a 1-to-2 ratio.
Representative McGuire, does that help? Go ahead, follow up.
Is there a general formula in normal years? Is there a general formula for what's collected versus what we actually receive?
Mr. Fryer.
Mr. Chairman, Representative McGuire, I'd have to go and look and see if there is. That's not something we've ever really analyzed.
Actually, Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
And Representative McGuire, just as we've talked to our federal partners, we're probably at 102, 103%. So it's not huge. So, because that money's sent back and it comes, so it's not a huge delta, but it is over, we do receive, and I will get you the exact number, but it's certainly not a 2.5 time multiplier. It's somewhere between 100 and 110%, somewhere in that range, to the best of my knowledge.
Committee, Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, isn't that a timing issue, though? You're showing what you're sending to them, but you don't receive whatever it is for a few months later, don't you?
Mr.
Director?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Anderson, that's correct. So there's lots of timing issues here. I mean, and it's really based on, and it's an ongoing issue. And remember, what's interesting there is the federal government is not collecting enough fuel tax to fund roads. The Highway Trust Fund has to be replenished from the federal general fund to make the formula allocation for the states. And so at the national level, it's the Highway Trust Fund is broke. It's not collecting enough money. You know, the federal government has not increased their fuel tax since, I want to say, 1996. And as we're experiencing here in the state of Wyoming, you know, the increase in fuel mileage, the advent of electric vehicles, you know, at the federal level, you know, the funds collected continue to go down, and they have not raised the rates. And so federal dollars go into the Highway Trust Fund, and then that comes to us. But it's so you know, the thought, you know, there's more complexities there.
Committee, questions, Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for the repetition of this, but I want to go back to Representative Henderson's discussion on maximizing federal revenues. And the question goes back to our matching piece. Are we currently walking away from federal dollars because due to our inability to match? And I apologize if you've already talked about that.
Mr. Chairman.
Burr, can you drill a little deeper on that for us?
Mr. Chairman,
Thank
I
you.
can. In terms of the formula dollars, we are not turning any back. We have enough state dollars currently to match the available federal funding. So we are okay there.
Thank you.
Committee, any other questions on this morning's presentation? And if not, we're going to close and take a 10-minute break. And then we're going to come back to the next topic. And we'll come back to any public comment, and then we'll get into further discussion. I may hold public comment until the second item, just so everyone knows. We'll come back in 10 minutes.
Hello, Amanda. James.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I was just doing a sound check too. I can hear you.
Awesome.
Mary Beth. Hello. Hello. Testing. Testing. Testing 1, 2, 3. Heather, can you hear me?
Hi, Doug. We can hear you.
Thank you.
Back and get ready to go back to work.
And I knew McGuire was going to have to leave.
Yeah. I'm going to here in a minute. Okay, let's come back to order, committee. Appreciated that presentation this morning, but we need to get on to some folks who have been waiting patiently. Really appreciate all of the folks who are online with us today, and also those who are in the room who will now join us in a the next agenda item, which is our funding discussion, and maybe look for some practical solutions to where Wyoming is with our transportation infrastructure, et cetera. And so committee, let's get started right away. And I want to go to some folks from our congressional offices. I believe we have representatives from Senator Barrasso's office. Is that correct, Heather?
Yes,
So,
Mr. Chairman.
Amanda, if whenever you can allow them to come on board, we'd love to hear from them.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. This is Chaz Ziegler in Senator Barrasso's office. I handle surface transportation policy for the senator. And we also have James Wilson on the line, who's from Cody, who currently works as counsel on the Energy Committee, but worked last Congress on the Environment and Public Works Committee, which handles the highway reauthorization bill. So we're here to update you on progress on the highway bill and the infrastructure package. But we thought we would start first with what we did last Congress when Chairman Barrasso helped write the highway bill. James, do you want to take it?
Yeah, thanks, Chaz, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is James Wilson. I serve as counsel for Senator Barrasso, currently at the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, but formerly last Congress worked at the Environment and Public Works Committee. And I was there when Senator Barrasso was able to pass his surface transportation bill. Just kind of as some background, the Environment Public Works Committee, where Senator Barrasso was formerly chairman, they have jurisdiction over highways and bridges. And the Senate Banking Committee, they have jurisdiction over transit. Senate Commerce Committee, they have jurisdiction over railroads, safety programs, and other technology programs. And then the Senate Finance Committee, they have jurisdiction over funding and how everything gets paid for. So last Congress, the Environment and Public Works Committee, they were the only committee that was able to move and pass their piece of a surface transportation bill out of committee. Early in the 116th Congress, Senator Barrasso, who was chairman of the committee, then worked closely with then ranking member and now current chairman of EPW, Senator Tom Carper from Delaware. And Senator Carper and Barrasso and their staff. So we all worked together on a comprehensive bipartisan proposal that was eventually passed out of committee in the summer of 2019. It was passed in a unanimous 21-0 vote. We made sure that all the senators on committee and their staffs and their states were heard from, and that everyone's concerns were addressed, and that everything was done as bipartisan as possible. Just some highlights of what that bill included. Top line funding, $287 billion from the Highway Trust Fund. That's an increase in funding over the FAST Act, the previous authorization. That's about 27% increase over total funding from that authorization. Importantly, the law maintained traditional formula funding, which is important for states like Wyoming. And it ensures that the funding can be flexible, and it gives states the funding certainty that they need, kind of as opposed to competitive grants that don't have the certainty or the flexibility. The bill was able to ensure that over 90% of the total funding was formula funding. And Wyoming would see a big chunk of that increase as well. The bill also had a number of policy elements in it as well. I think first and foremost, it prioritized safety and increased funding for the current highway safety program. And it also created an additional safety formula program as well. It also created a new wildlife crossings program, which would help states like Wyoming ensure that areas where wildlife kind of migrate through or pass through corridors, that there can be safety features there to avoid collisions and to ensure better wildlife crossing activity happens. And in addition to that, we also, the bill also included new flexibilities in existing programs that would allow Wyoming to build out these types of wildlife crossing projects. On the front of streamlining and accelerating project delivery, the legislation adopted the one federal decision model, which was a model from President Trump. It would streamline environmental reviews and set a 2-year shot clock to make sure that these projects, that they don't take longer than 2 years to permit, and that projects that only take a couple months to, or a few months or a year to build, don't take even longer to permit. The bill also included measures to reduce paperwork burdens on states, and it made it so that states like Wyoming don't have to report certain performance measures like traffic congestion in areas where it doesn't make sense. And that's kind of a lot of the highlights, and I'll kind of stop there. In addition to the highway bill, Senator Barrasso was able to secure $64 million in funding for road and bridge projects in the December COVID relief package. That's $64 million for Wyoming. And I guess I will turn it over to Chaz here in a bit to talk about the status of where we are currently. Kind of as I mentioned, we were the only committee that was able to pass a bill through committee, and the other committees, unfortunately, were not able to complete their portions. So I think this Congress, we are looking for the measure that Senator Barrasso and Senator Carper worked on to kind of be a driver moving forward, and that other committees of jurisdiction will follow suit. So from there, I will turn it over to Chaz.
Mr. Wilson, before we do that, I'm going to allow the committee, if they've got any questions. I appreciate the review of the work you've done over the past couple of years. Certainly that's helpful. And I appreciate all of your patience and what you have to deal with back there. Just hearing you describe what has to go on in order for you to even get a bill up for consideration is absolutely remarkable. And so we all tip our hats to the fact that you were able to get some things passed. Obviously, here in a minute, we do want to get to what other kind of help might be coming, because out here, I think that we're all feeling the pressure of this infrastructure that needs any help we can give it. So committee, any questions for Mr. Wilson regarding some of the information he has provided? Okay, maybe we can go to Mr. Ziegler. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, James. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll just give you an update on what we know right now and where we are. So the current highway bill expires September 30. We're operating under a 1-year extension. Next week, we know the EPW committee is going to mark up a bill, which is great news. And we should have language next week. As James mentioned, the bill passed 21-0 out of committee. So Senator Barrasso is pushing hard for the committee to use last year's bill as a baseline moving forward for the next highway bill. So we're currently working with committee staff to ensure that, and working with Senator Lummis's staff, who is sitting on the committee now, which is good news for Wyoming. The other committees of jurisdiction, as James mentioned earlier, banking, commerce, and finance, they're working on their pieces. So that's also good news. It's unclear how the president's infrastructure proposed package is going to affect that process, but it appears the EPW committee is moving forward despite the talk of infrastructure on the side. And so once all the committees come together with their pieces, hopefully there's some floor time this summer, but we're just going to have to wait and see on that. And then as far as the infrastructure package goes, more people are talking about that than the highway bill, but there was a meeting last week, which Senator Barrasso attended with President Biden, congressional Democrats, and other Republican chairmen. And there was also a meeting this week in the Capitol that had White House officials, Secretary Buttigieg, and other members. So discussions are continuing. We're just going to have to wait and see, but we continue to push that we want the focus to be on core infrastructure, roads, bridges, water, ports, airports. But we're just going to have to wait and see where that goes.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler. Appreciate that. Committee questions for Mr. Ziegler. So Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for the update. I wondered if you've heard anything on public transportation. We have been working in Laramie County with the folks in northern Colorado on the Front Range Rail project. I wondered if you'd heard anything on your end on public transportation and prospects for the near future. Thank you.
Mr. Ziegler, go ahead.
Yes, I'm aware of the Frontier project. I haven't heard any movement on it back here, but certainly, we're always supportive of raising. In fact, we have raised with the banking committee on increasing Wyoming's transit allocation for the next bill.
Mr. Ziegler, I just have one question regarding the highway bill that's already been passed, and then any piggybacking that you can do going forward. What kind of timing are we looking at? When can Wyoming hope to receive some help out of any infrastructure work that you're doing, or this additional highway work that the good senator's doing? What can you tell us on some timing issues?
Well, I think we're going to know on a infrastructure package probably pretty quickly here, whether there's going to be a bipartisan deal or not, I would say in the next few weeks. And if that falls apart, I think things are going to get complicated, and price tag's going to go way up, and we're going to lose bipartisanship. Now, I think on the highway bill aspect, I think that's going to take time, especially after EPW marks up, because usually once they mark up, that sets the ball and gets the ball moving for the other committees of jurisdiction to act, but that usually takes a few months.
Okay, thank you for that. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jazz, good to see you. It's been a long time.
Good to see you, sir.
One question I have is that, Wyoming had toyed last session with a road usage charge versus gasoline tax increases. And there's been efforts, certainly in the West, to look at this on a more regional basis. Do you know if there's been any effort nationally into a road usage charge to be able to raise highway funds for the highway fund?
Go ahead, Mr. Ziegler.
Yes, sir. And James, hop in where you see fit. But yes, the vehicle miles traveled concept has been out there. In fact, I believe a couple of highway bills ago, there was a pilot program for, I believe, Portland. Correct me if I'm wrong. So yes, that's been around. It's an issue. Certainly an issue for Wyoming. We drive more miles than anyone else in the country. I believe second to us is Alabama, and interestingly, Mississippi. we drive about 17,000 miles per year per capita. So it's an issue absolutely for Wyoming and how that money would be distributed. There are also some privacy concerns with that, but it's, and how you collect it, but it's certainly an option and one that people are weighing.
Mr. Ziegler, it sounds like to me that it's just an issue that's not going to go away very quickly, at least all that you read about it.
I agree.
Committee, anything? Thank you for that. Anything else, committee? Any questions for Mr. Ziegler? We sure appreciate your patience with us and you hanging in there, Mr. Ziegler, to give us your thoughts. And we appreciate the work of the good senator. Hope you'll pass along our best wishes to him. And thanks for your efforts back there.
Great. Thank you, sir. James, do you have anything to add before we jump?
Nothing else from me, and echo Chaz, but thank you guys all again for inviting us on and letting me chat with you all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilson. Appreciate that.
Feel free to reach out, and if you have any further questions, we're happy to visit with anyone.
We sure will, Mr. Ziegler. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to move on. Thanks, gentlemen. We're going to move on. We've got a representative, I believe, from NCSL, who has been waiting patiently as well, and I'd love to get to them.
Mr. Chairman, it's Douglas Schinkel.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Douglas, good morning. And just for the record, if you could be formal and state your name and who you represent.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you for having me, Chairman Landon and Chairman Burkhart. My name is Doug Schinkel. I am the Transportation Program Director for the National Conference of State Legislatures, or NCSL. I know some of the members on the committee have worked with Senator Pappas and Representative Henderson some in the past. I think I've worked with some of other of you in different ways. I know there's some newer members, so let me just quickly give maybe a brief overview of what NCSL is. So NCSL is a membership organization that serves all 50 state legislatures and the legislatures of the territories in the United States as well. And that means we serve the legislators and the legislative staff. So I've worked with Mary Beth and Amanda and Heather before, and they're great staff. So I'm happy to be here today. And so always keep us in mind when you're looking for comparative research and you're trying to get a sense of what's going on in other states. And that's kind of why I'm here today. And I'm down here in Denver today. That's where NCSL's headquarters is. We also have an office in Washington, D.C. that conducts our federal lobbying work. So I'm happy to try and address those questions, although I'm not really the expert on what we're doing vis-a-vis state, federal state relations in DC. I am a native of Colorado and went to CSU, so please don't hold that against me. I grew up in Loveland, Colorado, so not too far from Wyoming and very familiar with Wyoming, spent a lot of time there growing up. So very appreciative to be here. And with that, I think let me share my screen and start the presentation. Just give me one moment. Can everyone see that?
And Mr. Schinkel, I would just ask, we're not going to interrupt you much, I don't think. We're going to ask you to just clip right through your presentation, as we have lots of guests here today, anxious to get to them as well. So please proceed.
Sounds good. So let's dive right in. I think a lot of you know kind of what the pressures are in terms of declining revenue and increased costs, but I thought I'd throw a few of these slides in real quick. This slide just kind of shows the projected growth in construction costs, which of course are kind of projected to continue to go up. That's the black line on the top. And then the red line on the bottom is the projected vehicle fuel economy. And of course, that is rising as well, which is impacting gas tax revenue collection. Here's another slide that came from CDM Smith, who are toll consultants, and they do a lot of great research, and they put out a couple studies. And this basically shows that the red line at the top is kind of what we would expect to collect in the future at a national level in terms of gas tax revenue. If the fuel efficiency of the vehicle fleet stayed the same. Of course, that's not going to be the case though. And we're already starting to see a decline in gas tax revenue, particularly in states that maybe have more fuel efficient vehicles. But as you can see here, this kind of just demonstrates this delta, this gap is projected to get wider and wider. And there are two different projections in there. One is the EIA, which is kind of an electric vehicle prognosticator. And another one is from Bloomberg. And you can see in both cases, the projected shortfalls are pretty significant.
Mr. Schenkel, I want to tell folks in the audience here in the room that if you can't see the screen, please don't hesitate to move your chair out toward the committee and turn it so that you can see the screen. If you'd like to do that, please do so. Go ahead, Mr. Schenkel.
Thank you, Chairman. This slide is kind of interesting. It's a little bit out of date now, but it kind of just demonstrates, if you look at 2000, you can see that highway user fees, tolls, and taxes made up 55% of state highway program revenues. You fast forward to 2015, you see that's fallen by 13%. And like I said, a lot of that just goes back to what's going on with the gas tax. Some states, including obviously Wyoming back in 2013, have raised their gas tax fairly recently, but a lot of states haven't. And you see that being kind of supplemented largely by states figuring out other ways to supplement. And those are, typically, some of them are user fees, but some of them are just general funds or sales tax or diversions from elsewhere. And this is from a study that NCSL contributed to in 2016 that kind of analyzed all the ways that states pay for their transportation systems. They found 54 different funding sources that states use. Now, I must caution that most of these are not ones that are typically used or are bringing in a lot of money, but however, some of them, like, sales tax is something that in Missouri, in Arkansas, for example, I think they both dedicate, I want to say, a half cent of their sales tax to transportation purposes. So obviously that's a big amount there, but kind of an interesting one to look at. And if you have interest about any of these, just let me know afterwards. So I'm really going to get into here, mostly talking about some of the most common user fees and what states have kind of been doing the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years with transportation funding revenue. So this first slide is just kind of demonstrating that since 2013, 30 states and DC have increased their gas tax, and that's looking possibly like Missouri may do so as well this year, as well as Washington and perhaps a couple other states. 22 states and DC have indexed or variable rate gas taxes. So that means they are in some way linked with either like population or the consumer price index, or in some way they're meant to kind of grow if the price grows. And so there's been a lot of activity here, and I'm guessing you all generally know kind of how gas tax works, so I won't spend as much time on that. There has been a lot of activity with regards to fees for plug-in hybrid or in electric vehicles. 28 states now have fees for electric vehicles and 14 have them for plug-in hybrids. The fees for electric vehicles range from $50 up to $225 in Washington, D.C. And I have heard discussions that part of what's being discussed with the transportation reauthorization, but also the infrastructure package at the federal level is perhaps to put in place a federal electric vehicle fee as well. And most of the money from this, there are a few exceptions. A few states are dedicating the money to be used for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. But in most instances, all of the money from this is actually going into the transportation funds in this state. So to actually pay for kind of traditional infrastructure, asphalt, bridges, roads, programming, et cetera. So, and obviously that's not a lot of money yet. I think there's no state that has more than 2 or 2.5% of their vehicle fleet that is electric. But as some of these states begin to transition, especially as they transition their own state fleets, we're going to obviously see these numbers rise. So something definitely to keep an eye on. Another interesting things that states have been doing is they've been kind of playing around with their registration fees. So, and this is just their kind of traditional vehicle registration fees. So Oregon actually took something where they implemented a tiered registration fee that's based on the miles per gallon. And so essentially you're paying, if your vehicle is over 40 miles per gallon, then you're paying a higher vehicle fee. That's a way to try and capture that lost gas tax revenue, and also acknowledge the fact that, you know, there's some vehicles out there that are pretty high, that have very high fuel efficiency, but they're not necessarily electric vehicles or maybe even hybrids. So that's what they did in Oregon. And you can actually get out of that fee if you participate in the road user charge system in Oregon, but I'll talk about that in a minute. In California, they indexed their, they created a couple new fees, but their actual vehicle registration fees are going to be indexed to the CPI going forward. There are discussions going on in Colorado right now with their transportation package. And I know that they're also considering indexing their registration fees, just so it's not something you have to constantly return to and it kind of keeps up with inflation. I don't think it's anything really excessive in terms of the indexing. This slide is just to demonstrate that the federal government's been of big help in terms of allocating a lot of money to states to kind of look into road user charges, vehicle miles traveled, VMT, mileage-based user fees, MBUF, or some of the terms. I usually use RUC, road user charging. And you can see the amount of money that's been allocated to states over the last 5 years through this program, this Surface Transportation System Funding's Alternative Program, STISFA. NCSL actually helped lobby for the creation of this program because we thought it was important that with this kind of recognition that the gas tax is kind of increasingly at risk to not be able to kind of generate the amount of money and capture all the user fees from all the users of the system, that it was wise to kind of play around with some different models and some different pilots. And so a lot of states have received these, and the year I have up on the screen was 2019. You know, Wyoming received something to look at, you know, how they could explore linking the IFTA process with an MBUF. And so this is kind of the landscape of what's going on with road user charges in the country. The yellow arrows you show the states that are looking at kind of interoperability. So what happens when you cross state lines? Obviously, if you live somewhere like Cheyenne, you might be going into Colorado a lot, or if you're up in the Black Hills area, you might be going into South Dakota. So what do you do? How do you capture that mileage in those kind of situations? So, and then a lot of states kind of monitoring the issue out west, and a few out east. Definitely the actions out west at the moment. And two states have operational programs, Oregon and Utah. In 2022, Virginia will go live with their RUC program. And let me talk about those on the next slide and give you a little more detail about those. So this is a comparison. This slide has a lot of detail on it, but I think it's helpful to put this comparison kind of up here of the two programs. So maybe if I talk about Oregon first, because Oregon's really the one who's been talking about RUC since the early 2000s, established a task force back like in 2002 or something like that. And in 2013, they passed legislation to establish the nation's first RUC program that went live in 2015. It's called Orgo. And any vehicle that has mileage per gallon over 20 mpg is eligible to participate in the program. If they do that, then they don't have to pay the tax. And this is all voluntary, right? So they're just vehicle owners are choosing to participate in the program. So if they do so, and you have a vehicle that takes gas, you can keep your receipts and you can get remitted, and basically you're making sure that you're never paying more in your registration fee than you would pay in gas tax. There are three different firms to that offer reporting and payment services for Oregon. 2 of them are private and 1 of them is the state DOT. Oregon did that intentionally because they thought consumers might want some level of choice, and some citizens might want to give their information more to the government or to a private sector company, and there's different kind of payment models. So they're kind of playing around with that a little bit. So vehicles that are over 40 miles per gallon, as well as electric vehicles, are exempt from the enhanced electric vehicle or enhanced mileage per gallon fees if they enroll in the program. So essentially that's a way to say, look, you can pay this kind of enhanced expensive fee, or you can choose to go into this program and then you don't have to pay that fee. So they're trying to offer a little bit of a carrot, and Utah does something pretty similar. And Oregon's current rate is at 1.8 cents per mile. It is kind of set as a formula there, so it'll probably go up a little bit over time. So with Utah, their program moved really quickly. Actually, they passed a bill in 2018 and then 2019, and then bam, they had a program starting in 2020. And it's only open to electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, and gasoline hybrids. They went with only one firm, DriveSync, to offer reporting and payment services. And in Utah, an electric vehicle owner pays a $120 fee. So once again, if you enroll in this program, which is voluntary, then you don't have to pay that $120 fee. There was legislation considered this year to increase that fee considerably. I think almost to $400 or something like that. And really the logic behind was that was like trying to push more people to go into the RUC system. But that bill didn't pass, but I expect we'll see more of the same maybe in Utah and other states. And I think that kind of captures that. I mean, the main thing that I think that people are wondering about and was referred to in your past conversation is just this idea of payments and privacy. And those are really linked. They're really linked. So
Mr. Schenkel, let me just jump in real quickly. Thank you for punching on through, but Senator Anderson has a question.
Yeah, of course.
Mr. Chairman, what's a mileage fee for Utah? You said it was 1.8 for Oregon. Is it the same for Utah?
So,
Mr. Schenkel, go ahead.
Yeah, it's 1.5 in Utah. So pretty similar, but a little bit less. Yep.
Okay.
And there's not a lot of drivers in these programs. I mean, vehicle owners in these programs yet. And the administration costs are high because there's not a lot of drivers and they're still trying to figure things out. So it's not, fair at this, it's not fair at this juncture to kind of compare, gas tax. They commonly say that the cost of administering a gas tax system is between like 1% to 4 or 5%. For RUC right now, it's 7% to 25 to 40%, just because you're not bringing a lot of money, but that will change over time. But as I was saying, that the real big question is payments, and then that kind of informs the privacy question. So there's kind of a flip side to what you do with the payment options. So you can do a payment option, like you could have someone in some states, 16 states actually have annual vehicle inspections where you have to bring your vehicle in person. I don't think Wyoming is one of those, but in those states, you could do an odometer reading and then you would be good. And there's not really you're not having your you're having your movements and your miles tracked and what have you. But the flip side of that is that you're sacrificing accuracy. If in Wyoming, there's a lot of obviously landowners that have really large ranches, or you're going to visit your friend, or you're working and you're driving on private land, well, you shouldn't be paying for the miles when you're driving on those properties. And so in that case, it kind of behooves you to be quote unquote tracked, because then it's ensuring that you're paying the kind of correct amount. Same thing applies if you leave the state. What if you go on a big road trip and you drive, out east or over to the West Coast, or, just somewhere far, then you're paying for all that mileage. So being tracked, and there's ways that they can disaggregate the data, and there's language in place in both these states to kind of get rid of the data within like 30 days and in systems to make sure that it's not used for anything except to just kind of administer the system. But offering, I think, payment options to citizens, consumers of this, as this kind of grows up to scale, I think will be really important. 13 states are introduced and debated RUC legislation this year. I know Wyoming was one of those, and I followed that debate. Most of the bills haven't been enacted this year, but I think it's just a matter of getting some of these common terms and terminology out there and getting the public thinking about it, because I think Senator Pappas refer to this. I don't think this is going away as an issue. And it seems like that this is gaining steam, even though there's a lot of things still to be dealt with out there, and a lot of obviously skepticism, and I think communicating with the public. I will note that Oklahoma, that there was 2 bills enacted this year, one fairly minor one in Utah, and then Oklahoma, they actually did create a road user charge task force with some members of the DOT and the state legislature and other appointed members to kind of look into RUC research further. So this is another topic I want to touch on. It's kind of a minor thing, but I thought I was just trying to kind of think about what states have been doing recently. Transportation network company fees, transportation network companies, or TNCs, that's Uber and Lyft. And I know that Uber and Lyft don't have a large presence in Wyoming, but I know that they do have a presence. Some other states, they have decided to, well, so 10 states, the ones you see in blue, have fees collected on TNCs. It's usually per ride, and it usually is like either a flat amount, like 25 cents, or it's like a percentage of the fare or something like that. But the states you see highlighted in red, California, Pennsylvania, or I'm sorry, California, Maryland, New York, and Massachusetts, all dedicate some of that money that they collect to the transportation fund and to transportation projects. And I should note on that point, I referenced the Colorado transportation package that's going on. It's kind of interesting, it has some interesting things in it. It does have a fee. I can't remember the exact amount, but it does have a proposed fee on Uber and Lyft rides. It also has a fee on delivery services. So on things like Amazon, and also on food delivery like DoorDash and Grubhub and what have you. So I think they're trying to think about how can you maybe more broadly interpret a user fee and trying to capture some money from entities that are using the road system. I know that if you're in some neighborhoods at certain times, it seems like there's more delivery vehicles out there than there's actual people driving, their own personal vehicles. And so that's really it. This is kind of a few ways to get engaged with NCSL. And I'm happy to talk to you about that another time. I did want to note that our legislative summit, which is typically in the summer, has been moved back to November 3rd through 5th in Tampa, Florida. And we'll probably be talking about some of those issues there. So hope some of you can join us, and I will take any questions that you have.
Mr. Schenkel, thank you for pushing on through a great presentation. I would ask if there's any possibility you could share these slides with our staff, and then they can maybe forward it out to the committee. Really good stuff. Appreciate it. Obviously, this is an issue that is picking up some steam across the country. So, committee, any questions for NCSL? Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, does he have any idea what the transportation network company fees are in those states that are doing that?
Mr. Schenkel, did you hear that question?
Yeah, and if you gave me a couple of minutes, I could probably report back with the answer, because I do have it in a memo somewhere. But what I will tell you kind of offhand is that those fees have typically been around, I would say 25 cents is like pretty standard. And you obviously don't want to be too out of bounds with what other states do. Obviously, you will have different considerations in Wyoming since you're, a smaller market. So you have to be careful about what kind of fee you put in place. In a big state like Texas or California, Uber or Lyft aren't going to pull out of the states because you put a fee there because there's just too much business. So I do think you have to think about that a little bit, but I can forward that memo to Mary Beth and Heather and Amanda and make sure that gets passed on. And that has the amounts for all the states that I referenced there.
Thank you, Doug. That would be helpful. Appreciate that. Committee, anything else? Mr. Schenkel, thank you very much. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much,
Alrighty.
committee. Have a
We'll
great
see
day.
you a little further down the road. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, we're gonna keep pushing on this topic. We've got some guests who have waited patiently. Really appreciate them being here, and I want to get to them. So we're gonna kind of skip over on the agenda I-80 tolling and other master plan solutions. We're gonna hold that till we get to suggestions from some of our users. And we have some folks in the room, and then we also have some folks electronically with us on Zoom, and we'll get to them as well. So those in the room, I would love to invite you to come forward. Gentlemen, we would start with you guys if you'd like to come up and give us any reflections you might have. And we'll continue on with testimony that we hope will give us some perspective of what you all are running into out there and what you might be able to bring to us with respect to particularly our interstate system, but also just roads in general in Wyoming. So, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a note of, it's on.
You got it.
Okay.
I was motioning to Heather.
Oh, okay.
You had nothing to do with this.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so the committee knows, we've invited users of the highways here in Wyoming to come in and give us their views and that. And I asked them 4 specific questions and asked that they would answer those questions along with anything else they'd like to share. And those questions were kind of directed more towards I-80, but I think they would apply to all the states in Wyoming. What they like about our roads, what they dislike about the roads, how they would fix those dislikes, and how they would pay for them. And I specifically asked that operational people, not public and government affairs people, provide those answers. The reason being is it's a different viewpoint. The operations people deal with the issues every day. I know that they deal with the closures on I-80 due to weather and that sort of thing. And I think it's important for the committee to hear their views and their input on this. I think we really do need to hear from the users about what the future looks like and their feelings and thoughts. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I think that's really helpful. Thanks for that background. And I agree. I look forward to whatever you guys can bring to us. You know, we're interested. We pick up on things when we get together. And so we look forward to it. I would ask that you introduce yourselves and who you represent, and please offer some words of advice to us if you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, committee members. Floyd Reinhardt with United Parcel Service. I'm currently domiciled in Cheyenne, and I've been with the company for 35 years. We have almost 800 employees working across 20 locations here in Wyoming and serving our residents and using our roads. Obviously, the roads here are our workplace, our daily workplace. And we drive some average 18.5 million miles in Wyoming on the roads every year. 7.5 million of those are on I-80. So we really enjoy a lot of usage here in our state. There is a lot of space to cover. Some things that we've been asked to address. And again, we are operators and we're not the public relations folks, so we may not be as polished as you're used to. Some of the things that we like about I-80.
That's okay, Floyd.
Some of the interstates, we enjoy pulling longer loads, extended loads, the distance of the state. I-80 traverses the entire state. We enjoy that. I-25 all the way also is the same. Since Eric deals with I-90 some. Certainly, we enjoy the length through our state to be able to traverse the whole state and to be able to pull those extended loads. Those are some of the things that we like. It's easy access on and off those interstates to our facilities, our buildings where we deliver, where we sort and resend those packages out to other locations in our state and across the nation. Another question was things we don't like about I-80 or the interstate system. We're like everyone else. If you could change the weather, we'd certainly enjoy that. But other than the closures, there's not a whole lot we don't like about the interstate. The congestion from some of the weather-related issues. On to the questions 3 and 4. How would we fix issues and how would we pay for them? That's a great question. Some of the things that we would like to see if there was going to be a tolling type situation is that there would be improvements. Things we would like to see a third lane. If we're going to pay and other folks are going to pay, we'd like to see something done improvement wise. Congestion on I-80, you'd think there'd be no congestion, but in a 50-mile-an-hour wind with 2 semis trying to pass each other, it'll back you up for 20 miles. Certainly that's an issue for us most of the year, which is winter. We would like to see that in certain areas like it is around Laramie through the summit and the pass there. Some of those areas heading out toward Wamsutter and toward the border. A third lane in the westbound side where the wind comes from would give us more room to get around and create less issues when there's accidents. We do believe that the fuel tax now, which we paid almost $700,000 last year, is at this time the way to go. We believe in that system. We think that it works for now. Mileage, certainly we could support something like that. If it was on a national basis, a comprehensive vehicle mileage tax, something to that nature, but we certainly would not want to deal with each individual entity across the nation on something like that. Other than that, we don't have too many more suggestions. Eric, I'll turn it over to Eric.
I appreciate that, Floyd. And
Eric, pull that over close to you if you would, please, just
Yeah,
to
no-
make sure we can hear you. Thank you.
No problem, Mr. Chairman.
And you
And
want to introduce yourself to us?
absolutely, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chair and committee, my name's Eric Tischer. I'm a operations manager for UPS in Gillette and Casper. I'm domiciled in Gillette, so I experience a lot more of the northeast corner of the state and the roads that we have up there, I-90, certainly I-25, but then also managing the Casper location for UPS here in Gillette. We have our only hub for UPS is in Casper, and so we have a lot of our feeder, our over-the-road truck activity comes based out of Casper, and so we certainly enjoy the use of I-25. That's how we get a lot of those loads to Casper, but then also I-80 is, as Floyd referred, 7.5 or more million miles. We travel on that road every year because the packages that we deliver have to come from other places. A lot of that is fed from Salt Lake coming up on I-80, and then certainly from Denver, and that's the majority of where our volume that we deliver comes from. And as Floyd referred to, we would at this time be most interested in the tax, the fuel tax, as the best way for us to contribute. And if we went to a vehicle mile travel model, something like that, UPS, obviously, we operate in all 50 states. And so, it would be difficult to have us have to, pay a fuel tax and then a vehicle mile travel, but have that be at every state level for our company. It would end up being a nightmare. But I think the answer would be in a more comprehensive federal plan as far as vehicle mile travel. I know that's not really your guys's arena, but I think that that would be probably the most effective way to administer the vehicle mile travel model.
So, thank you, Mr. Fisher. It's good to see you again, by the way.
Yes, sir. Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
You hung out at our house when you were growing up, so. Any questions? Senator Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, are triples any interest to UPS? I know a lot of states use them, and we had a bill some decades ago to do that. Is that a possibility that you like the longer Rocky Mountain doubles that we have now? Would triples be of interest to you?
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, go ahead.
Senator Anderson. Certainly triples would be something we would love to have, and anything that can extend our loads, we like that. We enjoy the Rocky Mountain doubles through here, but the triples would always be a plus for us in any state.
Representative Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, gentlemen. How do the triples handle in a higher wind condition? With the route through I-80, we do get a lot of high winds actually through pretty much all through Wyoming, but how would the triples react versus the Rocky Mountain doubles? Is there a difference in handling?
Mr. Chairman.
Good question. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burke, obviously they do handle differently depending on the weight in the trailers. The back one could get to swinging around on you, but these guys do at certain places throughout the state drop trailers due to high winds or even not pull, turn around. So they are required to make those kind of decisions when we have the high profile restrictions out there. How many boxes, what's the weight of the back box, and where they're going. So a lot of times that is the big factor, and more than the length or the small boxes, but certainly they react a little differently.
Go ahead, follow up. Representative, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one more question. If we were to go ahead and impose an increase in the fuel tax, would UPS be willing to absorb that within its operational cost? Or would that eventually get passed on to anybody and everybody that uses UPS service?
Good question, and I would have no idea how to answer it, Mr. Chairman. So most likely.
So you're welcome, Representative. Good questions. I've got a final question, gentlemen, and then we'll move on to others. But if we were to move forward with the suggested increase in the fuel taxation that would result in better roads, would UPS support that?
Certainly, something like that we would. We think that's the best avenue now, and we think there's room for it in there. We think that our competitors should have to pay a larger sum, but certainly we agree that there's room there.
You guys have been great for hanging in there, and thanks for.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Anderson, and then we'll come back.
Mr. Chairman, we're talking about increase in fuel taxes. I think it's been estimated that we need about 24 cents more to pay for the highways. How does that affect you? Were you thinking in that kind of terms of 20 to 30 cents?
That's not my purview, gentlemen, and I wouldn't be able to think in those terms for you. That'd be coming from Atlanta. So I'm afraid I'm not going to be the one to answer those for you.
Sure. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Floyd and Eric, I appreciate your comments. And I do understand you're probably making corporate lawyers who are listening in just cringe right now, wondering what you're going to say. We are not holding you at anything. We understand these are your opinions as operational personnel, which we really appreciate sincerely. So if you had to pick a state that you like running through, that UPS says, hey, this is someplace we really like going through, what state would it be and why?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I've been in Colorado and Montana and Wyoming, and we certainly enjoy it here. We can move through the state quickly. There's not a lot of congestion. There's not things holding us up other than the weather, which we have in the West. But my experience has been the movement of packages is much easier and more productive through Wyoming. So we enjoy it here. I've only been through those 3 states.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you. And then my next question, the director is probably going to cringe at this one. If Highway 30 was improved and you understand where Highway 30 goes and it's open more than the interstate. Do you think it would be worth, and I'm watching how I'm phrasing this because I realize you can't speak for the company. Would you be interested, do you think, and other trucking companies in paying maybe an additional fee in the winter to avoid the closures on 80 to get permission to travel on 30 if 30 was improved, to allow some of that travel? We can't afford the $6 billion to make it a 4-lane highway, but to allow some additional travel, maybe put it bluntly, you get to go around your competitors for a small fee.
Certainly, that'd be something that I think we'd be interested in. We use Highway 30 now to go around. And of course, we use every road in the state to go around. And we have no problems with some additional funds to keep those open too and help out with that. It is very helpful when we go around those areas.
And Mr. Chairman,
One more, and then we're going to move on to all the rest of the
Okay.
folks that.
well, this is an easy one.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anything else you would like us to know?
No, sir, I think we're done, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Really appreciate you being patient with us.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, co-chairman and committee, thank you guys for having us and listening to us. We appreciate it.
Good to see you guys. Thank you. Look forward to working with you in the future. Okay, we're going to go to who's next here in the room. Do we have anybody else in the room? We've got.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheila Furch, Wyoming Trucking Association.
Thank you for being here.
Just a few comments because I know you actually want to hear from the users. We have talked as my membership throughout the last week during our convention about the issue of highway funding. And their message to me is the same thing that I've been telling you as committees for the last several years, is that we understand the philosophy that fuel taxes are probably not sustainable long-term, but short-term, they're the best game around. They're easy to administer. People understand them. It's a fairly painless way to go about collecting highway funding. My members do not support tolling on current capacity. As UPS, and UPS is a great member of mine, I think they very eloquently said they might consider supporting tolling if there were additional improvements that would help the movement of freight. But if we're just talking tolling current capacity, that's a non-starter for the majority of my members. VMTs, road user charges, again, very eloquently saying, not ready for prime time, at least at the state level. Perhaps long-term, that's the best solution out there, probably the most fairest, if we can figure out a way to collect it at the federal level. So I think those are important things to talk about. Highway funding is difficult and there may not be one silver bullet. We may need to talk about several ways to increase the way the highways are funded in the state of Wyoming. And not all of them may be palatable to everyone, but I think as the chairman have been telling us, everything's on the table and we understand that and we appreciate that, because there are certain things my members will support and certain things that are just non-starters for them. And Mr. Chairman, just while I have the table before you ask questions, just want to make a real quick clarification on IFTA, and I know the director will probably clarify as well. The state isn't out money when a carrier pays their fuel tax in Wyoming that owes another state additional money. That carrier pays that money. The state doesn't pay that money. The carrier pays the money. So if they have purchased fuel in the state of Wyoming at a lower rate, and then they travel in another state with a higher rate, then IFTA bills them for that balance. So the carrier is the one paying the difference in the fuel taxes in the various states. Same way, if he purchases fuel in a higher state and then travels the majority of his miles in the state of Wyoming at a lower tax rate, then he gets a credit on his IFTA for the next quarter. Doesn't get a refund, but he gets a credit for the amount of tax he paid over what he operated in. So just wanted to make that clarification because it's not the state that's on the hook for paying that balance of what's due for a tax rate.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Sheila, for that clarification. And I do think the director was going to touch on that too later in the day. Appreciated the opportunity to interact with some of your troops last week. Nice job down in Cheyenne, and that was very valuable to visit with some of our truckers. So thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate both chairmen serving on the panel during our convention.
Representative Stivar's got a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back in the 70s, early 80s, Wyoming used to have a tonnage tax. Is that a consideration?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question, Representative Stivar. No, that's not a consideration for carriers. That is an absolute non-starter. It's a ton-mile tax. It's a tax that's based on the weight and the miles that a truck operates. There are currently 5 states in the nation that have it. Every one of those states wishes they could get rid of it. It's very burdensome, both for the state and for the carrier. There is high evasion. I've seen evasion rates of up to 50% in the state of New York. Basically what happens, and we saw, I think when we got rid of the ton-mile tax, that was a little bit before my time, so I'm just going by memory. But when we got rid of the ton-mile tax, we were seeing evasion rates, estimated evasion rates of between 30 and 35%. Basically, the good carriers pay it, and the other carriers are probably not going to get audited because there's just not the manpower out there. Even with the electronic use of record keeping and data keeping at this point, the ton-mile tax is extremely expensive for states and expensive for the carriers.
So committee, draw a line through ton mileage. Ms. Furch, thank you. Appreciate you being
Mr.
here.
Chairman.
And I apologize for not knowing everyone in the room yet, but if we have other carriers, do we have anybody else in the room? If not, I want to go to those. Okay. Oh, please come forward. Yeah.
I wasn't a carrier, so.
No, that's okay. I just know we've got carriers waiting, and it's good to see you. Ms. Legursky, thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm Katie Legursky with the Associated General Contractors of Wyoming. We are the Contractors Association. We are the ones that build and maintain Wyoming's $6 billion infrastructure. We know firsthand how our roads are deteriorating and how quickly they are because we are working on them on a daily basis. This past year has proven to all of us why we must continue to invest in our roads and highways. Wyomingites were able to buy groceries and doctors were able to get the necessary medical supplies they needed during the pandemic, thanks to our trucking association and our drivers out there and the condition of our highways, road and bridges. We believe all funding mechanisms should be on the table. It is very imperative that we have a sustainable long-term funding mechanism for our roads, bridges, and highways in the state of Wyoming. This is the first time our association has come out in support of tolling of I-80 because we understand that I-80 is the 2,000-pound gorilla for our highways in the state of Wyoming. The amount of money that is currently being spent on I-80, if there was tolling I-80, that money could be spent on the rest of our roads throughout the state of Wyoming. We believe a road usage charge or a vehicle mile tax should be done on a regional basis or on a national level for some of the reasons stated earlier. But we do believe that all funding mechanisms should be on the table. It will probably have to be a combination of different funding mechanisms to get to the investment that we need in the state of Wyoming. We just don't have the per capita. We don't have the number of people to make one particular user fee to bring in enough money. For instance, with a fuel tax, we all understand that a 1 cent in the fuel tax raises very little money. But if you're out in California, because of the population there, they're talking billions of dollars for that 1 cent. So it's going to take a combination of that. But we do look forward with working with this committee to find funding mechanisms that work for the citizens of the state of Wyoming, and anything that we can do to assist you, any information you guys might need, we're happy to provide that for you. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Katie. Questions for the Wyoming contractors? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Katie, you mentioned your organization supports I-80 tolling if the money goes back into I-80. Do you know where your organization stands on a fuel tax?
Ms. Legursky, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and Co-Chairman, yes, the association would support a fuel tax. We would support almost any funding mechanisms for increased funding for our infrastructure, except for a road usage charge, because we believe it needs to be on a regional or on a federal basis.
Follow up.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Just clarification. I'm not asking if you support all of them combined, just maybe one or the other or that sort of thing. So, I don't want to stack tax on tax. That was just an explanation.
Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it. Oh, Representative Burke, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Katie. I'd like to ask you the same question I asked a representative from the UPS. If we implement if the contract association basically handles our infrastructure across the state and we increase our taxes, would the contractors absorb that cost? Or would that get passed back on to the state, increasing the cost of already high cost to maintain our roads?
Mr. Gursky?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Burt, a lot of those increases would be passed back on to the end user. It's extremely expensive. We know firsthand the increases that we see. For example, right now, due to the pandemic, there is a huge material supply shortage as well as price escalations. And, contractors have to absorb a majority of those costs oftentimes. So yes, a lot of those costs would be passed back on to the project owner.
Okay, follow up. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the idea of raising our fuel costs or fuel tax across the state in order to bring more revenue to cover our costs wouldn't necessarily be a cost saver measure when we bill that back to the state for the use or for the work.
Mr. Gursky?
I need to rephrase.
Excuse me, yeah, if you could just rephrase, I got a little confused on a cost saving measure by
That's okay.
raising our fuel tax.
Representative, can you state that a little differently for her?
I can. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if the state increases the fuel tax, then the contractors will end up sending that cost back to the state. Would we essentially save money or bring enough money back in to cover the cost of maintenance if our cost to maintenance goes up because of what the contractors are going to end up paying because of the new tax?
Mr. Chairman, I can answer that in a number of ways, and I would definitely have to visit with our members on that. One of the difficulties that we're running into right now with the lack of available fundings is WYDOT is doing a pavement preservation system where pretty much that money is just going for black material, going for asphalt. We're trying to preserve the life of our roadways by doing that. By having increased funding, we could do a number of other projects. We can actually start improving. We can start improving our safety of our highways. We can look at doing some of the other needed constructions, whether it's some of the dirt work out there, whether it's additional bridges, whether it's additional other things. Contractors build a lot into the cost of their projects. Oftentimes, people think that we make quite a bit of money on our projects. That isn't necessarily the case. We're lucky right now if we make 1 to 3% profit on any of our projects. We constantly absorb a number of the cost it is to do business within the state of Wyoming or anywhere for that matter. So it's not as simple as additional money. We're just going to pass those costs on. It depends upon what those costs are, what the overhead is, things along the line. So I wish I could just say, yeah, we're going to pass 100% that back on to the agency, but that isn't necessarily always the case, depending upon the type of the project, whether the project involves more materials, whether it involves more labor, whether it involves, but I'd be happy to have a couple contractors answer that and go in a little more detail for you on that question.
Thank you, Ms. Gursky. Okay, Representative Overmuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Katie. We talk about, we talk about funding WYDOT, but I always think about it as funding a major industry in our state. One that's been here, is here now, and is critical in the future. Wyoming runs on its roads, and it always will. And it's not just the contractors, but it's the suppliers, it's the equipment dealers, it's the repair shops, all throughout the state of Wyoming. And my question for you is, how many Wyoming-based members does your organization have? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I do appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, and also Representative Obermural. Our association is about 225 members right now, which includes contractors who are the individuals that actually perform the work in the state of Wyoming, and then our service providers and suppliers that supply the necessary equipment to the contractors in order to do their work. And I would say we're 95% Wyoming companies. within our association. We do have some out-of-state companies because there are times where we do have to rely on subcontractors to come in to perform some of the work that's not available within the state of Wyoming. Highway construction, we do travel quite a bit. Since you can't perform a lot of work in your backyard. So we're used to traveling. Not only do we perform work within the state of Wyoming, we travel across other lines. So I would say about 95% of our membership is resident contractors. You also make a good point that we are a major industry within the state of Wyoming, and I would be happy to bring some members to future meetings to provide some of the additional benefits that we do provide. It is known throughout the construction industry for every $1 spent on construction projects, about that dollar turns over anywhere from 4 to 6 times within the local economy, whether it's the contractor spending nights in the hotel rooms, the food, the supplies, purchasing gas. I'll give you a prime example. A number of years ago, when we started doing work on Dougherty Pass, the town of DuBois was very, very concerned that they were going to lose a large portion of their tourists coming in because of the road construction. And they were very concerned about those projects taking place and what it would do from the bottom line. About 8-10 years later, once that construction finished, they were very sorry to see the construction industry leave because of the economic development it did for their community.
A follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative.
Is it fair to say that you have members from every county in the state of Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman and
Gursky.
Representative Obermehl. Let me double check on that. I believe that is the case. We are lacking in some members more in southwest Wyoming because oftentimes we see a lot of contractors coming up from Utah to do the work there. So let me just double check on that, but definitely on the supplier side, we are in every single county within the state of Wyoming.
Thank
Okay,
you,
go
Katie.
ahead.
Thank you, Mr.
Representative.
Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Legursky, thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to let you go on, and we'll get now to folks who have been waiting online for. So Amanda, if you would begin to get to the list on our Zoom visitors.
Mr. Chairman, we have Melissa Lee with Corthell Transportation and Darren Wingard with CR England available.
Let's go to Miss Lee first, and Mary Beth, thank you. I didn't mean to overlook you over there. Heather and Mary Beth and Amanda keep us straight. So Miss Lee, if we could let her on board. And
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, committee members, thank you for having me today. I appreciate that. I just wanted to stop in and comment a
Miss
little
Lee,
bit.
can you do me a big favor and just for the formality, if you could introduce yourself and tell us who you represent, we'd
Sure.
really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep. I work for and I'm a part owner of Corthell Transportation. We're a medium-sized, oversized, overweight carrier located in Rock Springs. We've been there for over 10 years, and most of our employees live in Rock Springs, and that's where our office is located, and all of our trucks are there. And but we do service the lower United States, but most of our business touches the state of Wyoming on a regular basis. The freight that we move is going to be all oversized, overweight freight. So almost every load that we ever have is going to have a special permit from WYDOT to travel through the state.
Terrific. Thank you. Please share some thoughts with us.
Okay. I do understand the funding issue that you are up against, and I do respect that, that is a big issue. I wanted to just give you a few thoughts from the oversized overweight industry, really. And there was a few questions sent out to us to comment on. And really the only one that I have a comment on is that one of the things that the oversized overweight carriers really love about I-80 is that there's not a lot of overhead structures. I-80 is a big thoroughfare for oversized overweight freight from the central United States to the West Coast. And without I-80, we're forced to try to find a different route around, which is not very easy. We love Wyoming for that reason, because we're able to very easily, safely, and efficiently transport those larger loads on Wyoming roads. And my concern with tolling I-80 is that a lot of toll roads in lots of different states generally take out the oversized, overweight community's ability to travel on them. If you drive anywhere in other states where there's a lot of toll roads, you'll just see no permit loads, no permit loads. They have this beautiful highway, and they don't allow any oversized freight on it. And so we can't use it. And that would be very, very detrimental to our business. We wouldn't be able to get to our shop location, and we would be forced to take our business probably elsewhere because there just aren't that many other roads in the state of Wyoming to choose from. So that's
Miss Lee, I've got a question in that regard.
Yes, sir.
What is the reasoning that a toll authority, is it because of the damage to the road that they wouldn't want a permitted load on that particular highway? Or is it because of inability to go a speed limit? What's your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that is it's usually because of the administration of the tolls. So it has to do with the toll booths and the way that they have to have the cars go through in order to charge the tolls to each person. So it'll take a lane, from being, 25 feet wide or 50 feet wide on a 4-lane divided highway, where you've got multiple lanes that you can travel with an oversized load down to, a typical like 14 feet, which means that, those wider loads just flat can't travel through there. And the same thing with the overhead structures. As soon as they put, a camera up there to capture the license plate, et cetera, they put that at not a height that's sustainable for oversized, overweight movement.
Okay, gotcha. That's helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Please proceed.
So my other concern with tolling I-80, and also just wanted to comment on the raising of the permit fees, is that it's difficult for us in the, oversized, overweight freight makes up about 2% of all trucking industry. So it's not a ton, but it's a definite necessity because, they build those bigger items like generators or electrical buildings or the wind tower blades, still a lot of big items that have to be transported. It's very necessary, but they don't make up a huge amount of the truck population. So my other concern with that raising of the permit fees is asking one small industry to really provide so much more funding when the permit fees for the state of Wyoming are already quite high in comparison with other states around them. And I know that you guys are doing a lot of studies and I have a lot of respect for that. But I just do want to say that if you impose more fees on oversized, overweight movement, I feel like that's pretty detrimental to business in the state of Wyoming. And it would be something we would definitely have to look at if there are alternatives to even, traveling through the state of Wyoming, which we don't want to do because we like to keep the revenue at home.
So Ms. Lee, thank you. Committee, anything for Ms. Lee from Sweetwater County? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lee, what do you think needs to be done with the highways and how would you pay for it? You've indicated what you don't like.
Yes.
What do you find acceptable?
Ms. Lee?
I respect that question so much, but I don't necessarily feel qualified to answer it. I don't want you to come in here and feel like I'm just saying no fees, no fees, no fees. We can't ever have any fees because we understand that it does have to be funded. And I do support that. And I'm not sure that I know for sure.
So in other words, you hired us to do that, right? There you go.
And I support you by attending this meeting and getting to your emails and all of that. And I will continue to do that, even if we don't like each other's answers.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. And you've got a couple of good representatives sitting here on this committee from down in your neck of the woods, and they're doing a great job. So thank you for being here this afternoon. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Anything, committee? Okay, let's move on to Mr. Wingard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, and members of the committee. Really appreciate the opportunity to provide some commentary today. My name is Darren Wingard. I'm Vice President of Associate Relations at CR England. Most of you probably are familiar with our company. We're based down in Salt Lake City. We are a truckload carrier, and we're actually the largest refrigerated truckload carrier in the country, currently running about 4,500 trucks nationwide. And you see our trucks running up and down I-80 pretty much all day, every day. We do a lot of miles in Wyoming. And again, appreciate the opportunity to provide some commentary. In preparation for this hearing, I was able to do a survey with the drivers on the CR England road team. Our road team is a select group of drivers consisting of our most experienced and best drivers. It's a group of 15 drivers who represent the company, represent the driver force at company events and at some industry events. And I got back a lot of answers to the questions, and I was able to go through and kind of boil that down to what I think are some very simple, very practical answers to these questions. And they're really mostly focused on the driver experience. So let me take you through, again, this is a distillation of a bunch of comments that I got. Number one, many of the drivers that responded to the survey talked about how they really enjoy driving I-80 through Wyoming. They find it to be a good experience. They like the road. They like Wyoming. They like the view out of the windshield of the truck. They probably like that experience a little bit more when it's not winter, but there's nothing we can do about that. But again, in general, they were very, very favorable in their opinion of driving through Wyoming. In terms of kind of the top three answers to what the drivers like about I-80 in Wyoming, number one, they really expressed appreciation for the number of rest areas and the number of truck pullouts that are available along I-80. They really appreciate those. I know that you've put the investment into those. They also mentioned good lane markings and good cone placement during construction. They feel that that is a little above par compared to other states. States have to do road construction, and drivers appreciate it when it's easy to get through that construction. And number three on the list of things they like is the communication with motorists, with truck drivers. They're talking about the variable speed limit signs, large electronic billboards. Those are very helpful, and they really appreciate those. In terms of some things that they don't like or that could be better, again, talking about the basic pullouts for trucks, in some cases could use better lighting, and it would be nice to see portable restrooms and trash cans there at those facilities. That would make that experience even better. Another comment in this area was to have escorts for snowplows to create a safer condition. So drivers, they're talking about four-wheelers now, drivers are not trying to pass them during snow removal. One driver mentioned that he's seen this kind of process implemented in New Mexico, and he thought it was very good. Again, the escorts for the snowplows. And then another, not a surprise that we get so many comments about driving through Wyoming during the winter. They asked about the road treatment that WYDOT uses in the winter. The drivers seem to think that's a mixture of salt, sand, and salt rock. In Colorado and down here in Utah, it's done with some chemicals being applied. That may be more expensive than how it's being done now, but the drivers were saying that might create safer conditions on I-80 and maybe also have the effect of fewer cracked windshields. Some of them said they seem to get more cracked windshields going through Wyoming than compared to some other states. And in terms of how to fix the issues, the drivers didn't really know how to answer that question, and I'm not sure how to answer it as well. And then on the financing side, I totally concur with the representative from UPS. We think that fuel tax is the best method that we have at this point to address the budgetary concerns. Of course, none of us like to pay more in taxes, but we do understand that as users of the roadway, both from a company perspective and from an industry perspective, we understand that we need to help pay for the infrastructure, whether it's in Wyoming or other states around the country. So again, I concur with the gentleman from UPS and Sheila from Wyoming Trucking Association on their comments regarding that question.
Mr. Wingard, thank you. We really appreciate you being here. Now it's this afternoon, but all throughout the morning. And that is valuable to us. Committee questions for Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Wingard, how do you feel? I don't see many CR England trucks pulling doubles. How do you feel about the issue? You've heard the discussion on doubles.
So we are a full truckload carrier. The vast majority of what we do is with a 53-foot refrigerated trailer. We do have some dedicated accounts around the country where we pull doubles. Very few, like a handful of accounts where we're pulling doubles. So I don't think that we would be looking to do that in Wyoming. I don't see anything on the horizon that would have us doing that in the state of Wyoming. And again, those dedicated accounts are kind of more of a local dedicated service offering where we're pulling doubles.
Okay. And
Co-Chairman,
follow
go
up,
ahead.
my other question, would there be any interest on your part? And I've seen a few trucks at times on Highway 30 of improving Highway 30. Like I said, we can't turn it into another interstate. We can't afford that. Of improving Highway 30, but charging some sort of fee to use Highway 30 during the inclement weather when I-80 is closed?
Yes, sir. Great question. I think that we would like to, I think we'd be interested in looking at that option. Of course, it depends on how much that would cost. There could be circumstances where we have loads, especially if it's an expedited load, where we would like to have that option and be able to exercise that option.
Okay. Thank you. Hey, I appreciate you being here, for taking all that extra time with your drivers, and thank them for us if you would, please.
Yes,
We
sir.
do appreciate it. And I may go park myself at one of the truck stops. I live in Rollins, and just start asking drivers what they think. So
Great idea.
thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Wingard, thank you. And we look forward to working with you in the future, and good luck. We appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Anytime. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else, Mary Beth, who's waiting?
Mr. Chairman, we do not.
I want to offer the opportunity, anyone want to provide any public testimony, because what we're going to do is break for lunch after this and come back to wrap up discussion on this agenda item, committee. So is there anyone here who wants to provide any public testimony? Any public testimony online with us? Nobody?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, committee, that we'll come back and wrap this up. Let's, what time are we looking at? I'm going to close public testimony, by the way. Let's come back at 1:15. I know that's a quick one. Folks, let's get out and get back so that we can finish up this evening. Okay, so we're gone for an hour.